On October 28, 1994, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and Carol Co. released the worldwide hit science fiction action-adventure film Stargate. Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin, the writers of the movie, had planned for a film trilogy, but the initial trilogy plans were turned down by MGM, who held the rights to the film. This was simply because of a deal between the American premium television networks Showtime and MGM Studios, the in-house studio division of MGM. Welcome to Stargate SG-1. As this video is going to be focused on Season 1 of Stargate SG-1, I thought it best to talk about the production and creation of the series in general before delving into the recap of the season. The story of the creation of the show is pretty fascinating, and like I said in my video on the movie, I just like talking about fun facts about things that I like. So what better place to start with than the guys credited with kickstarting the whole franchise proper. Stargate SG-1 was created by Brad Wright and Jonathan Glassner, who both had writing and executive producing experience in another MGM Showtime collaboration science fiction TV show, The Outer Limits. After hearing rumors of MGM's plan to create a TV spin-off series of the film, both Wright and Glassner worked independently on their own proposals of the spin-off series, only to be greenlit by then president of MGM, John Symes, on the condition that they both worked together as executive producers on the show. What's wild is that according to Brad Wright, the SG-1 section of the title was pitched by Symes himself, and that within 1 week MGM released posters of a Stargate SG-1 show without telling Wright and Glassner. Symes approached Richard Dean Anderson, who played the titular character in the long-running MacGyver show, and RDA agreed to be involved in the project under two conditions. One, if his character, now spelled with two L's, Jack O'Neill, was allowed to be a more comedic character than Kurt Russell's version in the 1994 film, and two, Stargate SG-1 be an ensemble show, so that he would not be the sole focus of the plot like he was in MacGyver. Now, with a household name as part of the main cast, Showtime made a 2-season, 44-episode commitment in 1996, and principal photography for Season 1 started in Vancouver in February 1997. As both Kurt Russell and James Spader were both quite big film names by the time Stargate was released, and the idea of film actors coming back to enjoy a long TV stint was still quite a few years before being in vogue, a la True Detective and even Spader's own recent hit show, The Blacklist, both Russell's and Spader's characters had to be recast for the sequel/spin-off show. Like previously mentioned, by 1996, Richard Dean Anderson, from this point on will be affectionately shortened to RDA, had already enjoyed a very culturally successful run as the titular character in MacGyver, which ran for 137 episodes and 2 TV films over the course of 7 seasons. Though the show was only a moderate rating success, the charisma that RDA brought to the titular character allowed the character and the show to become a household name and be part of the cultural zeitgeist. It was the same charisma that made Symes approach RDA in the first place, and the casting of RDA as Jack O'Neill, 2 L's, was probably the best next thing back then they could do, short of somehow getting Russell and Spader back to reprise their roles. Once again, this was quite a few years before the stigmatizing prestige that separated TV and film was removed, bringing back famous film actors to the small screen. Now that I've already talked a little bit about Kurt Russell's replacement, let's take a look at the rest of the principal cast for Season 1, starting with James Spader's replacement for our beloved DJ, Michael Shanks. Prior to Stargate SG-1, Shanks had only worked on a few short films and received guest starring roles before landing the role of Daniel Jackson. According to show co-creator Brad Wright, part of the reason he got the role was because Shanks was able to do, and I quote, "the perfect imitation of James Spader." This was something that I realized when I rewatched the film for the Stargate video, because there were multiple moments in the movie where my monkey brain was confused because it sounded like it was Shanks playing Jackson even though I knew that it was James Spader. Christopher Judge ended up getting the part for the Jafar Teal'c. I'll get into the evolving mythology and new terminology later on in the video as they come up, because of his muscular presence. And according to tvtropes.org, his character fits the big guy trope, and I mean, look at the guy. Funnily enough, when I mentioned 2018's God of War video game and its 22 sequel, God of War Ragnarok, Christopher Judge provided the motion capture and voice performance for Kratos in both games, also partly, if not mostly, because of his imposing figure and sublime voice. Before landing his role as Teal'c in SG-1, Judge had guest starring roles for projects like Bird on a Wire and even an episode of MacGyver, and he also got a 22-episode recurring role as Officer Richard Stiles in the Canadian-American crime drama series Sirens. What's fun to think about, and could serve as a serendipitous coincidence, is that after RDA accepted his role, SG-1's co-creators reviewed several thousand taped auditions and invited around 25 actors for screen tests in LA. Among those, Michael Shanks, Christopher Judge, and the last member of the titular SG-1, Amanda Tapping, naturally gravitated to each other during the casting process, which would have showcased their synchronicity and chemistry with each other, which no doubt helped out with their ultimate casting. Amanda Tapping played the talented astrophysicist and then, at the start of the show, Captain Samantha Carter. Before SG-1, and similar to the other two less-known co-stars, Tapping had only received guest starring roles in several productions like the Canadian TV show Side Effects and The X-Files. The final cast member to receive main billing for Season 1 of SG-1 is Don S. Davis, playing the Major General George Hammond, General West's replacement. Though his role as General Hammond remains his best-known role until the actor died on June 29, 2008, Davis was an extremely prolific actor whose acting career started in the late 80s after he served in the military, landing roles like Major Garland Briggs in Twin Peaks and even being the stunt double for Dana Elka in MacGyver. Gee, that show keeps showing up everywhere. When I first started writing this script, around a week after my Stargate video was published, I had the plan of having all the little fun facts about Stargate SG-1's production into one whole big section before the recap. But whilst I was rewatching the episodes and seeing a few common names pop up every now and then, I decided to scrap that idea and instead disperse the fun facts at various points of the video to break up the recap every now and then. Sure, this doesn't help out with a couple of commenters' dislike of my tangents, but at least this time around, hopefully, the tangents would at least be topical. I'll try to keep it to the point as much as possible, I promise. I'd also like to mention that seemingly no commenters picked up on the fact that I never got back to listing the differences between the theatrical release of Stargate with the director's cut, as the process of writing that script took place over a month and I just simply forgot. Luckily, the differences were negligible and none of them were too important to my recap of the movie. Some commenters in the Stargate video mentioned that there shouldn't be a need for a spoiler alert for a movie that's 30 years old. I believe that putting up a spoiler alert is still necessary and is just polite. So since I do want as many people to watch SG-1 with fresh eyes, and if you're interested in it, this is your official opportunity to go watch the show because there will be spoilers ahead of this point. I'm not going to really go into future seasons until their respective videos, but I will definitely mention if it's the first appearance of a concept or a plot idea that the show returns to. And believe me, rewatching this first season, I didn't realize how many definitive canon concepts are introduced so early. Please remember that anything that is said in this video are my own opinions, so if you don't necessarily agree with what I say, that's fine. I'm open to conversation about the franchise and even learning about new interpretations that other people had. For example, the user Tyrannic Puppy commented on how they always assumed that General West had been the one to modify the nuke to be unstoppable once activated in the film because of their personal, and I quote, cynical view of the upper levels of the military. And I love that kind of discussion. And once upon reading Tyrannic Puppy's comment to my own family, did I find out that my mother also had the same interpretation of that sequence in the movie. Just to let you know early on as well, my headcanon is that the series takes place in an alternate universe that shares a lot of similarities with the movie universe, though are ultimately different. That sounds like a familiar alternate universe that we get to see later on in the season. Finally, the last disclaimer is the recap of the pilot episode is pretty detailed because it is a two-parter and it introduces so many differences between the film and the series, differences in the returning characters, as well as the new status quo and logline for the series as a whole. It's been recommended that I make a whole separate video for the pilot episodes, but that meant denying you guys of the rest of the season for another couple of months or so, and I didn't want to do that. Future editor Joel here, and that's why the microphone might sound a bit different. I have had to compromise and split the season 1 video into 2 videos because the length of the whole season recap would make the video way too long for my computer to render. It's a pretty old computer. And with all that out of the way, let's talk about the production factoids that I found fascinating when looking into the show for this video. Though the main setting of Stargate SG-1 is the fictional Stargate Command in the real Cheyenne Mountain Air Force Station near Colorado Springs, Colorado, the show itself was filmed in and around Vancouver, British Columbia, and most of the producers, crew members, and guest actors were Canadian. It's all about those tax breaks, baby. Another cool fact about the show over the years was that Martin Wood, one of the series' most prolific directors, directing 47 of SG-1's 214 episodes, filmed only half a dozen stock shots of the real Cheyenne Mountain complex for the series only 10 days before the premiere of the pilot episode. And this limited footage was used throughout most of the show's run until the beginning of season 9, when the producers finally filmed new shots for the establishing shots. Why did they not film more or update the footage any earlier? Because they didn't know whether SG-1 would be renewed for the next season and believed that it would be cancelled after each current year, so why bother? I love how uncertain the television industry can be back in those days. Not that it's much better nowadays, but back then networks can leave the studios and everyone involved hanging on their complete and utter whim for so long. Now shows are generally told their renewal status much earlier. Unlike its feature film predecessor, not all sets could be as massive and extravagant in the TV show, but the one exception to that rule would be the SGC set, specifically the embarkation room, the room that housed the main Stargate prop. And this room was enormous, as due to filming restrictions, it had to be twice as big as the 6.7 meter tall Stargate prop. That's 22 feet tall for our Imperial friends. So that's about 13.4 meters or 44 feet for the room itself, which is mind-boggling to me. I made such a big deal about the size of the cartouche in the film video and how the actors must have felt to see a physical prop of that size, and I feel like it's a whole nother level for the embarkation room. The show's estimated budget in the earlier seasons was around 1.3 million US dollars per episode, and it's quite remarkable to consider that due to the nature of the premise of the series, only approximately $400,000 per episode was spent on visual effects. And when you think about it, that budget for the series was quite tight and utilized very well, as like the feature film, most of the shots of the series still stand up quite well to this day. A few things before I jump right into the recap of the series, starting from the somewhat controversial 100-minute/double-parter episode, Children of the Gods. Firstly, I'd like to reiterate that the magnificent composer of the Stargate film, David Arnold, did not return to work on the series. However, Joel Goldsmith, the main composer of Stargate SG-1 and its two subsequent spin-off series, Atlantis and Universe, had multiple discussions on the themes and soundtrack for the series with David Arnold. The main titles of SG-1 was a medley of several themes from the movie, while Goldsmith added a unique end sequence for the theme. MGM would initially insist on reusing Arnold's score in the pilot episodes during the original airing, though the 2009 direct-to-DVD recut of the pilot episodes used Goldsmith's original score. I'm usually someone who would preach of allowing creators of art having the final say in their artworks, but at the very least in this case, since the feature film was financially successful and the series at this point was one of the most expensive TV shows ever produced, MGM's overriding of the soundtrack kind of makes sense to ensure that a solid return came from their investment. And I'm not dogging on Goldsmith though. His works reference Arnold's masterpiece respectfully, and his later works on Atlantis and Universe are in their own right iconic as well. I feel like I should have an iconic counter at this point. Secondly, let's talk about the opening title sequence. In my Stargate video, I mentioned that the opening title sequence was like the one used in seasons of SG-1, and in fact, while researching for this video, because of the tight schedule and the short time between SG-1 getting greenlit and the pilot episode premiering on Showtime, the production team had to reuse an accelerated opening title sequence of the feature film. Anyways. Starting the series, we see in big white letters on a black screen, Showtime Presents. As mentioned earlier, Stargate SG-1 came into being from a collaboration deal between MGM and the television network Showtime. SG-1 was not the first television show created from the collaboration deal, but is definitely the most successful in terms of longevity of the series and episode count. Showtime being the first thing you see in the episode shows how much pull the network had during the production of SG-1, and that power will be more apparent in a controversial part of the pilot episodes later on that I'll delve a bit more in detail later. Next, we see the iconic MGM Lion vanity card before jumping straight into the cold open. We see a group of soldiers casually playing cards in the embarkation room. That's the official name for it, but going forward, for brevity, I'll continue to call it the gate room, as that has decidedly less syllables to say and is easy to write. The only thing to notice in this scene is the soldier mentioning that they're currently in an almost abandoned area of the base, and though they don't know what the area was originally used for, it's still hemorrhaging money, and personnel attached to the area are still constantly shipped out. A familiar rumbling starts to grow, and the whole room begins to shake before the tarp blows off the magnificent new Stargate that spins and lights up. The Stargate cawooshes sans strudel, and if you're confused as to what the strudel is, look at my Stargate video around the part where they activate the gate for the first time. I bring up the strudel from the feature film because the Stargate cawooshes, profile and front-on shots, in this opening two-parter were actually the same ones they used in the feature film, only sped up. They planned on remaking the effect for the series, but once again, due to the quick turnover and looming premiere date, they had to settle with reusing the older CG, and you can easily see an outline around the cawoosh CG in this profile shot. An alien scanner is thrown through the gate and does its job, and suddenly an incursion of enemies enter the gate room. The female soldier that ends up getting held hostage is named Senior Airman Carol Wetterings, according to the wiki, and a quick firefight starts. Now this is a cool tracking shot in between the Serpent Guards to the Golden Serpent. Looking back at the full effect of the costumes, especially during the tracking shot, the body proportions look kind of funny, especially with the Gold Serpent's arms kind of dangling there. Cool retractable helmet though. And I'm revealing it now for ease. The dude in gold is Apophis. More on him later, when Daniel explains to the other characters who Apophis is. And by the way, I like how the first character of the main cast that we see in this series is Teal'c. That's him. I'm going to say this now to avoid calling them the aliens for much longer, but Teal'c's race is the Jafar, as I've already mentioned, and we learn more about the race throughout the series, and it's implied that Ra's, Horus, and Anubis guards that we saw in the feature film were also Jafar, though we don't see the Jafar's most identifiable feature on the film. More on that later. Before the firefight, Wetterings was subdued by Apophis with a hand device that we saw in the feature film, and according to the wiki, and I'm not too sure when the series reveals the name, it's called a Karakash, or a ribbon device. I'll keep calling it a hand device though. There's also a quick shot that shows Apophis's eyes bugging out when a couple of his soldiers ended up getting killed in the firefight. It's a funny visual, but this will lead to consequences later in the season. Though one of the soldier boys managed to call for backup, the firefight ends quickly and backup arrives only when the Serpent Guards and Apophis were about to leave with Wetterings. And everyone, say hello to the absolute GOAT, Don S. Davis, the second actor with a main cast billing that we see. Rest in peace, you absolute legend. The pilot episodes were directed by Mario Azzopardi, who would direct 4 other episodes of SG-1, all in Season 1, and would return to direct 4 episodes of Season 1 of Stargate Atlantis. And though he didn't direct an enormous number of episodes, his work in the pilot episodes ultimately ended up providing future directors a template and a style to follow. A lot of his stylistic choices are followed through by future directors that helped give the series a sense of continuity while also being open and free enough for other directors to experiment. After the opening credits, we follow Smarmy Samuels as he brings O'Neill back to Stargate Command. As the series progresses, you'll get to find out why I call him Smarmy Samuels, but basically, he is a very punchable guy. I will explain later. We get to see a quick sequence of establishing shots to show just how hidden the Stargate is within the Mount Cheyenne complex. This also provides us with some character building for RDA's portrayal of O'Neill. O'Neill then meets with Hammond as we get some expository / semi-recap of the film's events, connecting the events of the movie to the series, and Hammond questions the accuracy of O'Neill's report on the Abydos mission from the movie, since the gold dude that Hammond saw had a distorted voice and had eyes that glowed like Ra.
These people, or aliens, whatever you want to call them, came through and killed 4 of my people and kidnapped another using advanced weapons.
We can't figure out how they operate.
Seen one before, I take it.
Yes, sir.
But your report said this Ra was in fact some kind of alien that lived inside a human body.
Yeah, his eyes glowed. That was our first clue.
Are you sure he's dead, Colonel?
Unless he could survive a tactical nuclear warhead blown up in his face, I'm positive.
Colonel, these people, or whatever they are, regarding another man who retreated back through the Stargate. I got a good look at his eyes, Colonel. They glowed.
I also find the way that Samuels is absolutely shut down by O'Neill way too funny when he talks about how they can't figure out how the staffs operate. We then get a confirmation of the timeline placement of the events of Children of the Gods in relation to the events of the film. It's been over a year. Kowalski and Ferretti from the Abydos mission, though played by different actors, are also brought in for questioning about the Abydos mission.
According to the mission brief, your orders were to go through the Stargate to detect any possible threat to Earth, and if found, to detonate a nuclear device and destroy the gate on the other side. To the best of your knowledge, Daniel Jackson and everyone else you knew on Abydos is dead, correct?
That's correct.
Good. Then you won't mind if I authorize a go-ahead on our plan.
Obviously, the Abydos Stargate had been buried in the rubble.
Well, somehow it got unburied.
The horror on O'Neill's face is visible when he sees the decidedly larger Mark V nuclear device compared to the feature film's Mark III, as Hammond reveals that the general consensus in the Air Force is that the Abydosian Gate was unburied, and that's where Apophis and his serpent guards came from. We get a quick scene that introduces us properly to the new Kowalski, with a quick mention of Skara, who turns out to be Shari's brother. I don't know if I mentioned that particular fact in the Stargate video, and O'Neill's son's accidental death.
My kid used to do that when he was little. Scar kind of reminded me of him.
Oh man, Colonel. You and me went through that whole mission together. I never even knew you had a son.
Well, he died. Just before the Abydos mission.
Note that the son's name in the series is Charlie instead of Tyler, as shown on the picture frame in the feature film. Kowalski's first name is Charles, and for a moment rewatching the episodes, I thought that O'Neill had named his son after Kowalski, implying of a history between the soldiers. And there is a history, as later revealed in an episode, but in this scene, Kowalski acted like he didn't even know O'Neill had a son. And I thought, surely you would tell someone if you named your child after them, right? In this case, I think it was just a coincidence that there are two characters connected to O'Neill named Charlie, whereas the first time I watched it, I thought it was like a godson, godfather kind of deal. Due to O'Neill's protests against using the nuke once more, Hammond agrees to at least check whether or not Daniel Jackson, good old DJ, and the innocent Abydosians were still alive. To check, O'Neill sends a tissue box through the gate to Abydos, considering Daniel's travel allergies.
There is one way to find out. General, we don't need that probe.
We don't?
Nope. This'll do.
Roger.
Chevron 4 encoded.
Care to explain this concept?
Chevron 5 encoded.
Jackson has allergies.
I get it.
You'll know this came from me and not from someone. With all due respect, sir, like yourself.
Now what?
Now we wait. If Daniel's still around, he'll know what the message means.
What if the aliens get it?
Well, they could be blowing their noses right now.
Later, the tissue box is returned, now empty, covered in sand with a message, "Thanks, send more," written on the side. With that, O'Neill is recalled back into duty, and a recon mission is set. At the mission briefing, we get introduced to another main character of the series, Captain Samantha Carter, and this scene has one of the most clunky and cringe-worthy lines ever written. In a special feature somewhere, the series co-creators mentioned that they didn't know how to write Carter's character early on, and it shows in these pilot episodes. There are a few moments where Carter has lines that should have probably been cut, since she's supposed to be the scientist of the group, and I'll point these lines out when they happen. But first, I'll just let you listen to this line.
Colonel, I was studying the gate technology for 2 years before Daniel Jackson made it work and before you both went through. I should have gone through then. And, sir, you and your men might as well accept the fact that I am going through this time.
Well, with all due respect, Doctor, I would.
It is appropriate to refer to a person by their rank, not their salutation. You should call me Captain, not Doctor. I'm an Air Force officer just like you are, Colonel. And just because my reproductive organs are on the inside instead of the outside, doesn't mean I can't handle whatever you can handle.
She's the one who MacGyvered the program that allowed the gate address to be inputted into the Stargate. So she is really smart. Samuel butts in, the butthead, and he believes that the safest thing to do is to bury the Stargate, but O'Neill says that burying the Stargate won't work because the aliens now know what humans are capable of. Note Apophis's eyes bugging out when his Jafar ended up killed. Added to the fact that the aliens also probably have spaceships, burying the gate won't necessarily stop them. Instead, O'Neill suggests that they use the Stargate to do a little reconnaissance. Though, for some reason, the subtitles at this point says reconnatoire, or however you say that. Future Joel edit, it's an even more fancy word that means exactly the same as reconnaissance. Well, la-di-da. And so the mission is approved. Hammond informs them if they don't return or send a message back within 24 hours, the military's Plan A will return. This interaction between O'Neill and Carter is hilarious.
Captain?
Don't worry, Colonel, I won't let you down.
Good. I was gonna say ladies first.
Oh, and then this happens. O'Neill's and Carter's interactions feel a little bit antagonistic against each other in this episode, particularly, since they'd never met each other and this is their first mission working together. And heavily implied is the misogyny between the Abydos mission men and Carter, which leads to her getting teased in the next scene after stepping through the gate, and the Abydos mission men getting her to do most of the grunt work. But throughout the events of the two-parter, O'Neill's respect for Carter quickly grows, and by the end of the episode, their interactions are simply banter, which is nice. On Abydos, Carter feels sick, while O'Neill and presumably Kowalski and Ferretti are handling the travel a bit better since it's not their first rodeo.
Maybe you shouldn't have had that big lunch, huh?
This rough or sick effect that traveling through the gate entails is removed almost entirely as the series progresses, unless there's something really wrong. It's explained that sometime off-screen between episodes they improve the dialing program for the Earth gate and manage to fix some of the energy fluctuations, hence why exiting the gate in later episodes aren't so chaotic. We'll get to an example of that later in the season, but when they go to Chilak later on in the two-parter, we get to see the characters violently ejected out of the gate and frosted like in the film. More on Chilak later as well. We finally meet the final member of the main cast when Michael Shanks's Daniel Jackson steps out with his beautiful wavy locks of hair. Like I said earlier, for the first couple of seasons, Shanks sports Spader's hairstyle from the feature film before moving to a haircut more in line with military regulations. And though he's quite fit throughout the whole series, later on we get to see Daniel getting absolutely jacked. But we'll get around to that when we get there. Skara gets the honor of being the first greeted by O'Neill, showing his importance to O'Neill's character. Alexis Cruz reprises his role as Skara, marking him as only one of two actors who appeared in both SG-1 and the feature film. This time around, to save money, time, and most probably a headache or two, Skara speaks English. Obviously, in-universe, in the past year that Daniel lived with the Abydosians, as they have taught him their way of life and language, he has taught them English. The rest of the Abydos mission men greet Daniel, and out comes Daniel's beautiful wife, Shara. No, wait, did Daniel just call her Shara?
Shara, don't be shy.
This is great for me, as Shara is a bit easy to type and easy to say than her film counterpart. And that's something that apparently Michael Shanks agreed with, as from what I could find online, one of the reasons why they changed her name was because Michael Shanks struggled to say Shari all the time. Especially during more intense moments or moments when he's speaking really fast and rambling. Maybe he kept ending up saying Shori, since words with AU in them tend to make an O sound together, like sauce or sauna. You might also notice that Shara is now played by a completely different actor. Something that both actors share though, is that they are both beautiful. I guess that's a bit of the male gaze coming through, but also, can you blame me? Cool fact about the actors, and I apologize in advance for butchering these names, Millie Avatal and Vaitiere Bandera, is that Bandera actually auditioned for the role of Shari for the movie, but ultimately ended up losing the role to Avatal. And when Millie Avatal couldn't reprise the role for the show, Bandera re-auditioned and landed the role for the series. She was also dating Michael Shanks at the time, but I'm sure that had nothing to do with her casting. Seriously, I don't think there's any nepotism or anything like that at all. Michael Shanks was unknown at this point it, and Bandera was probably far along in the auditions process when Avatar got the job, so they probably were like, hey, you were really good, and we're making a series, and Miss Avatar can't come back for the series, are you available? That kind of deal. Carter and Daniel interact over the dial home device, which I will be calling DHD from this point on, and remarks that it's the missing puzzle piece in the Giza dig on Earth. We never got to see how the Abydos Gate got dialed back to Earth in the feature film, so it's nice that the series managed to explain that, and it also gives another point of contention between Earth's Gate and Abydos's Gate.
This is how they controlled it. It took us 15 years and 3 supercomputers to MacGyver a system for the gate on Earth.
Hey, it's a MacGyver reference. However, that reference is removed for some reason or another in 2009 when they released the final cut version of Children of the Gods. And Carter instead says something like jerry-rigging or jury-rigging or whatever. Since I mentioned the final cut, multiple cast members came back and did new ADR for the movie for new lines to smoothen the edits, including Michael Shanks, who decided to redo his vocal performance to be less like Spader and more like himself in the later seasons. All in all, the plot in the final cut remains practically the same. The footage in general was sharper and clearer, complete with redone special effects and with a few scenes added for context due to a few scenes getting removed. 2 notable scenes that were removed were a particularly controversial sequence that I'll get more into it when we get to it, and the cliffhanger at the end of the pilot episodes, as it was originally done to set up the rest of the series, while the final cut is more of a standalone re-release of the pilots. Oh, and the final cut also got the opening title sequence it deserved, and Joel Goldsmith's score is issued, and he is given his full due as well. On a more somber note, the film ends with a dedication for the GOAT, Don S. Davis, who died in 2008. Back to the recap. After a quick explanation of their return, Daniel reveals that the aliens didn't come from Abydos, but where else could they have come from, since the Stargate only goes between Abydos and Earth, right? Daniel promises to help figure it out, but only after the sandstorm passes, so you know what that means. It's an obligatory eating an alien meal scene. Only this time it's featuring alien moonshine.
What's this?
Drink.
Moonshine?
Moonshine.
Yeah, moonshine, as in booze. Daniel, what are you teaching these kids?
Try it.
All right. Stars moonshine. Give it a little shot.
Smooth. Very smooth.
I believe this is ad-libbed, because look at how Amanda Tapping reacts to RDA's reaction.
Smooth. Very smooth.
A touching moment is when Skara once again tries to return O'Neill's lighter, but he tells Skara that he could keep it. It's another character with some emotional building in the episode and is a nice connection back to the feature film, and also provides O'Neill with an emotional connection. It would be a shame if somebody were to use that emotional connection as a call to action later on in the episode. I'm not actually going to use the whole foreshadowing is a literary device joke since it's most likely overdone by now. Daniel casually drops the information that the alien incursion must have been done by aliens from another gate, and both Carter and O'Neill are shocked to hear it, rightfully so. Okay, the reproductive organs line from Carter earlier was simply a terribly clunky line, but early Carter, before they figured out how to write her, does a terrible job of being a good scientist, especially with this upcoming line.
How about that?
I was there. We ran hundreds of permutations.
This line and her confidence at the impossibility of there being another gate goes completely against her supposed characteristic as a scientist. As a scientist, she should have known that more than hundreds of permutations had to be done before coming to an absolute conclusion, considering there are more than 2 billion permutations, not including point of origin. And she seems rather eager to shut Daniel's theory down when scientists should be open-minded. And also, Daniel's been correct with everything about the Stargate up to this point. I think they were aiming for smart, but ended up with annoying instead. Daniel explains how a month after the events of the feature film, after some exploring, they found a new section of ruins that houses some very important information, and he shows them.
So I figured that there had to be more to this place, so I started exploring. Just the area around the town and the pyramid at first, and after about a month I found this place.
Oh my God, this is amazing. This is the archaeological find of the century.
All over the walls there are hieroglyphs, and Daniel believes that it's all a map. The hieroglyphs are different sets of Stargate addresses.
Well, Daniel, we don't have that long. What's it a map of?
Cartouches seem to be separated clearly into groupings. Each grouping is attached to the others with a series of lines, and each grouping of glyphs contains 7 symbols, so you can see where this is going, of course. All of the symbols are on the Stargate in the Abydos chamber. Jack, I think that this is a map of a vast network of Stargates. Stargates that are all over the galaxy.
I don't think that can be, Doctor.
Why not?
Well, because after Colonel O'Neill and his team came back, my team tried hundreds of symbol permutations using Earth as the point of origin, and it never worked.
Oh, whoops, I forgot to turn off my Steam notifications during this annoying Carter moment. Once again, she repeats hundreds of permutations lines, and it's a shame that early Carter is like this, but at the very least, the writers quickly improve at writing her.
I don't pretend to know anything about astrophysics, but couldn't the planets change? I mean, drift apart or something like that to throw this map off?
According to the expanding universe model, all bodies in the universe are constantly moving further apart.
So in the thousands of years since the Stargate was built...
All the coordinates could have changed.
But why does it still work between Abydos and Earth?
Abydos is probably the closest planet in the network to Earth. I mean, the closer they are, the less the difference in relative position due to expansion. The further away, the greater the difference.
Okay, so what did we just figure out?
Any civilization advanced enough to build this gate network would be able to compensate for 50,000 years of stellar drift.
So, the Stargate can go other places.
The aliens could have come from anywhere.
Before we move on, let's take a deep breath in. What just happened was breathtakingly beautiful. In the Stargate video, I mentioned that the show creators retconned the location of Abydos, reducing it from the other side of the known universe to the closest planet to Earth in the Stargate network in the Milky Way galaxy. Controlling the scope and power creep in stories is a delicate skill of balancing. By bringing Abydos a lot closer to home in the Milky Way galaxy, not only do they open up a multitude of different locations the characters could visit, as there are somewhere between 100 to 200 billion planets in the Milky Way, but it opens up more avenues to introduce new enemies once Ra's and Apophis's race, the Goa'uld, are defeated. It's just a masterclass in writing, truly. Suddenly, Apophis and his serpent guards arrive on Abydos, and another firefight ensues. Teal'c realizes that the Abydosians are using weapons not native to their civilization, and Apophis mentions that Skara would be the perfect specimen, and that Shara could be the one. What's he going on about? I'll explain later.
How?
I'll explain later.
We then get to see how the DHD works, and the director makes a big deal that though severely injured, Ferretti sees the address Apophis entered. This is how they chased after Shara and Skara later on in the two-parter. What's kind of too convenient, I believe, is that Daniel and the main party seem to just so happen only arrive right as Apophis and his soldiers walked through the gate. We hear the Abydosian word for Stargate, Chopper I, and this comes up later. Realizing that the best chance to find Skara and Shara is to leave Abydos, Daniel tells the Abydosians to rebury the gate. He promised that he'll come back to Abydos in 1 year if he's able to get Shara and Skara by then. This gives the viewers a deadline for the rescue plotline, and the characters will return to Abydos at some point. Once back on Earth, we see the Iris for the first time.
Close the iris! Close the iris!
We get more of an explanation about the Iris in the 3rd episode, so I'll leave it till that episode's recap for now. But what an amazing concept. We then see an alien planet, the planet Chulak, the homeworld of the Jafars. And we see that Skara and Shara have been placed in a prison cell with a bunch of other people from other planets. Teal'c enters the cell and picks Shara out of the group, and she is separated from Skara. Sometime later, we see her in a section of the palace surrounded by other female prisoners, even Wetterings from the cold open. Teal'c enters the room and picks out Wetterings, and Wetterings is taken to Apophis's personal chamber, and after being subdued by the hand device, Wetterings is stripped, and we find out that Apophis is looking for a vessel for his Goa'uld queen. In a brilliant sequence of body horror, we see the Goa'uld larva squeeze out of the Jafar abdomen pouch. Though slightly goofy looking and is obviously a puppet or marionette situation, considering the time that this was done, it's done quite well, and I still feel a little sick watching this scene all these years later. Although, in a hilarious usage of reversing the footage, the Goa'uld slides back into the Jafar pouch, and Wetterings is swiftly killed by Apophis. And we get to see a shot of Teal'c's growing discomfort at the events he's witnessing, sowing the seeds of his future betrayal. Later, Shara ended up being picked out by Teal'c, and the same sequence happens to her. Though notably, This is where the controversial content of the two-parter comes into play. When Shara is stripped, we get, not here on YouTube because I don't want to get into trouble, a full frontal nude shot of Vaitiare Bandera. This scene and the dark subject matter in the third episode meant that the first 3 episodes of Stargate SG-1 are the only episodes to be rated R by the MPAA, Motion Picture Association of America, and rated 18 by the BBFC, British Board of Film Classification in the UK. So let's talk about the full frontal controversy for a little bit. As mentioned earlier, Stargate SG-1 was made as part of a collaboration deal between Showtime, the premium television network, and MGM Studios, the in-house studio of MGM. SG-1 was broadcasted on Showtime for its first 5 seasons before being bought by the Sci-Fi channel. Children of the Gods originally premiered as a television movie, though it would later be split into 2 parts for repeats and syndicated viewings, hence my repeated mentions of its dual existence as 1 and 2 episodes. The version available in the Region 4 DVD that my family owns seemed to be the original Showtime TV movie cut, including the controversial full frontal nude sequence. The full frontal nudity that appeared only in the original airing on Showtime was lambasted by fans and critics, and though at the time, prior to the airing of the episode, Wright justified the usage of nudity as integral to the story, both Wright and Glassner later acknowledged that Showtime pushed for the scenes, believing it would help the ratings. As an Australian, I've always viewed this situation as Showtime trying to be as edgy and more adult-oriented like HBO, and that, especially at the time, one of the main selling points of having a premium cable network was because of its proclivity and access to more adult-oriented content. Even though I can't think of anything right now off the top of my head, whilst writing and whilst recording this, how many coming-of-age stories of the mid-90s and noughties and even early 2010s had teen and preteen characters, mainly boys, vying for access to the child-locked premium cable adult content? The full frontal nude sequence in The Children of the Gods was probably a matter of Showtime enforcing an executive call on the production team as part of its content deal with MGM Studios, wanting to have a semblance of its premium cable content identity shown on the show, only to be completely thrashed by an almost universal disappointment and criticism by viewers and critics. The negative reaction was so strong that there was no more nudity shown for the rest of the franchise, and it's perceived as a strong family show. And as a young single man, even I have to agree that the show is all the better without needing to resort to such explicit content. Looking into the whole controversy, I actually found conflicting pieces of information about the way the scene was filmed, and especially how Miss Bandera felt about the scene. One source mentioned that Miss Bandera didn't want to do the full frontal scene and felt manipulated into exposing herself on set. Sources like What Culture described that Bandera only agreed to a topless scene only to be blindsided by the studio and network to do a full frontal scene, while other sources like on IMDb claim that she believed the full frontal shot was justifiable and that she wanted to do it. The general consensus is that ultimately, Showtime flexed their control over the content deal with MGM and forced everybody involved to include a nude scene, and it just so happened that Bandera was the one who ended up agreeing to do it to get the role. But because of the backlash, all subsequent reruns, and especially in the Final Cut DVD, the nudity was removed and Showtime never forced the show to do any more nude scenes. Anyway, let's go back to the episode. Unfortunately, Shara is not as lucky as Wetterings, as the Goa'uld parasite seems to be mightily impressed by her. We get a first glimpse of how Goa'ulds enter a host body in this safe for YouTube shot. I hate the icky fluids that the Goa'uld larvae have. Miss Bandera also does a really great scream in this scene. It's really haunting. We once again see Teal'c's disgust at the events happening in front of him, further showing his growing discontent in his position under Apophyse's rule. There is some discussion online as to whether or not the original Showtime airing had these cuts to Teal'c's face that comes up over the events of the episode to tease of his future betrayal. Some claim that these shots were added for the final cut release of the pilot. Personally, I'm not totally sure, as I didn't watch the show when it first came out. This recap is based on what is shown on the Australian Region 4 DVD of Stargate SG-1 Season 1. If it turns out that the Region 4 DVD mixed the nude scenes from the original Showtime version with the added edited scenes of the Final Cut version, then so be it. But one, I find it interesting that so many people mentioned it online, especially Reddit, And two, looking back in hindsight, even without these shots, it's kind of obvious that Teal'c would end up betraying Apophis, since he would have appeared in the marketing for the show leading up to the pilot episode airing as a main character working with the other main characters. Future Joel edit again. Upon looking at the DVD case even closer, I noticed that the copyright dates in the back of the DVD case that were listed were 1997 and 1998 for MGM Television Entertainment and MGM Studios, and 2007 for 20th Century Fox Home Entertainment LLC, meaning that the copy that my family owns was made 2 years before the final cut was released, so the shots of Teal'c's inner conflict seem to have always been there, but no one noticed, which is funny because they weren't really subtle shots to begin with. While this is happening back on Earth, while they wait for Ferretti to regain consciousness after his injuries have been treated, O'Neill invites Daniel to his home for a beer. This scene is to do a little bit more character building between the two characters, as well as reconfirming the series' connection to the feature film. Later back in the SGC, during the briefing of a possible rescue operation, Daniel postulates that the origin legend written on the Abydosian cave walls could have been inaccurate, as the possibility of Ra not being the last of his race seemed to grow higher and higher. What if Ra claimed to the ancient Egyptians and then to Abydosians that he was the only god to ensure their total devotion to him? Using the footage she recorded of the wall addresses that Daniel showed them, Carter was able to update the dialing program to automatically compensate for stellar drift, and that the program would be able to spit out a couple of viable addresses per month for SGC missions. Hammond, being the highest member of the military and commander of the SGC, practically says the logline of the whole series, so I'll let the late, great Don S. Davis say it once more.
People, let's not fool ourselves here. This thing is both vast and dangerous, and we are so far over our heads we can barely see daylight. We would all be much better off if the Stargate had been left in the ground.
I mean, think of how much we could learn. Think of what we could bring back.
What you could bring back is precisely what I'm afraid of, Captain. However, the President of the United States happens to agree with you. In the event your theories pan out, he has ordered the formation of 9 teams, whose duties will be to perform reconnaissance, determine threats, and if possible, to make peaceful contact with the peoples of these worlds. Now, these teams will operate on a covert, top-secret basis. No one will know of their existence, except the President and the Joint Chiefs. Your team will be designated SG-1.
Daniel manages to persuade Hammond to put him into SG-1 alongside O'Neill and Carter, and the group receive the news that Ferretti has regained consciousness. Receiving the address Apophis dialed, SG-1 headed by O'Neill and SG-2 headed by Kowalski gets the go-ahead for a recon mission to Llama. Their deadline is 24 hours, and if they do not return by then, their codes to let the SGC know to deactivate the Iris will be locked, and the gate will be sealed forever. As they march to the gate room, we get more character building for Kowalski when we see his loyalty and unwillingness to abandon O'Neill.
Not gonna happen, Colonel. SG-2 won't leave without you.
I sure hope nothing bad happens to Kowalski. Upon reorienting themselves after their rough arrival on Llama,
Damn it, it's cold.
Daniel remarks that the area around the gate seems to be a ceremonial place. While I was rewatching this season, I realized that this is one of his go-to explanations when they see a point of interest. The only time I remember him being wrong about a point of interest when he says it looks ceremonial is in the episode called Lazarus. SG-1 and SG-2 find a suitable site to make base camp, and O'Neill orders Kowalski and SG-2 to hold down the fort while SG-1 recons the planet and hopefully finds Shara and or Skara. While exploring the planet, SG-1 runs into a group of monks. Daniel manages to somewhat communicate with them when he mentions the Chapa-I, indicating that the Abydosian language and the Jafar language have similar etymological roots. The monks, believing that SG-1 are gods, lead SG-1 to the city, Llama, for the choosing. For a moment while rewatching the episode, I was confused because I always remembered the planet as being called Llama, but when the head monk points towards the city in this scene, he calls the city Llama, and I thought I had been misremembering, but according to the wiki, both the city and the planet are called Llama. When they arrive at a swanky-looking location, Apophis and his queen, Amunet, arrive. Once again, the timing kinda feels a little bit convenient, but whatever. And since Amunet is now controlling Shara's body, Daniel unfortunately reveals himself to the Gorwood, and he and the rest of SG-1 are captured. While we mostly follow SG-1 for the rest of this episode, the episode cuts back to Hammond and Smarmy Samuels on Earth to provide the audience with a countdown to raise the stakes. The editing for these cutaways are kind of janky compared to the pacing of the rest of the episode's events, so I won't focus too much on them. With only around 90 minutes left, Daniel awakens in the cell and SG-1 reunites with Skara while back in base camp. Kowalski reveals that he won't abandon SG-1, even if it means SG-2 is not able to return to Earth as well. This once again showcases his loyalty, and I'm really starting to really like the guy. Foreshadowing is a literary device. Back in the cell, Teal'c questions O'Neill about his wristwatch, as it's technology he's never seen before. Daniel tells him they're from a planet called Earth by showing the gate symbol for it. After observing the serpent guards and all the serpent imagery around them, Daniel realizes that the Goa'uld they've been chasing after this whole time has not been Ra, but Apophis instead.
It's from Egyptian mythology. Ra was the sun god who ruled the day. Apophis was the serpent god, Ra's rival who ruled the night. It's right out of the Book of the Dead. They're living it.
Skara is getting antsy about Shara and asks O'Neill when they're going to rescue her. O'Neill fully realizes the true hopelessness in their current situation and at first attempts to tell Skara the truth, but when Skara's confidence in O'Neill didn't waver one bit, this nice moment happens between the characters. Suddenly, Teal'c announces in Goa'uld, Japanese, I don't know, the arrival of Apophis, his wife Amonet, and Apophis's Goa'uld allies, it seems. This is also the first time the show mentions Ra's race, giving our human characters the identity of their new enemies. Though, annoyingly, multiple characters over the series pronounce it as Gould, even though it's spelled Goa'uld. Luckily, due to their shared roots in their language, Skara is able to provide us with a translation.
Who will be the children of the gods?
He said it! Tangent time. I love episode titles, especially really smart ones, or ones that reference to something else, or another episode. You can really get creative with episode titles, and I like how Stargate SG-1 and the other Stargate shows actually show the viewer the episode titles after the cold open and the opening titles. It makes it easier to find an episode, especially if you can't exactly remember the whole synopsis of the episode. And it's a shame that for a while, before streaming, a lot of shows didn't actually show their titles, especially if they were being shown on TV. British shows have the tendency also to not have unique episode titles and resorted to the rather boring episode insert number here. Even when there are multiple seasons or series as they like to call them, they would reset the numbering system. So episode 1 could mean the first episode of the first season or the second or the third. Of course, nowadays with streaming being such a big thing, even those British shows that had the boring standardized episode titles, it's easy to figure out which season and which episode you're up to, since the platforms relay all the information to the viewer when the viewer HUD is shown on the screen. But back to SG-1, I like the show's episode titles because it's always relevant to the events of the episodes and is referenced explicitly within the episode. Only a few episodes of Season 1 didn't explicitly reference the titles, like the Season 1 finale, Within the Serpent's Grasp, or Episode 18, Solitudes, but a lot of them do, and I love that. In my notes, I mentioned the fact that it seems that Apophis' allies all dress in different cultural clothing, which reminded me of what I talked about near the end of the Stargate video about how Dean Devlin, co-writer of the feature film, mentioned in an interview that the events of the third film in the planned trilogy would have revealed that all ancient mythologies were actually tied together and that SG-1 would do something similar. Difference being is that this scene is happening in the damned pilot. Well, I misremembered it while writing the Stargate video, believing that it happened way later down the line once the Goa'uld system lords were expanded a bit more. This was a repeating note that I had whilst rewatching Season 1's episode. So many foundational concepts for the series are introduced in Season 1. It's absolutely unreal. Back to children though. Daniel starts to break down and begging them to choose him to be a host so that he could be closer to Shara. His plea that something of the host must survive, and the callousness of Apophis' allies as they chose the humans they deemed to be worthy hosts seemed to trigger something within Teal'c, and we get a great shot of his inner conflict, and it's something that O'Neill also clocks. Instead of Daniel, Skara is chosen, and now that all of his mates have chosen worthy hosts, Apophis orders his serpent guards to kill all the remaining prisoners. As their weapons power up, O'Neill pleads with Teal'c to help him save everybody. My brother, Daniel, can quote this whole sequence verbatim. It's so iconic.
I can save these people! Help me! Help me.
Many have said that. But you are the first I believe could do it.
While writing this script, I saw that there was a discussion, especially on Reddit, about this turncoat scene. The consensus seems to be that Teal'c chose that moment to betray Apophis is because the humans on Earth, after being forgotten for so long, had managed to evolve and develop technology enough to almost rival that of Goa'uld technology. Therefore, if anybody in the galaxy had an inkling of a chance to wage war against the Goa'uld and free the Jafar from their enslavement to the Goa'uld, then it would be the humans from Earth. With Teal'c's help, and either some very strong plot armor or stormtrooper aim from the Serpent Guards, or both.
Both is good.
SG-1 manages to defeat all the Serpent Guards and create a hole in the cell wall to escape with the surviving prisoners. Though not before this nice moment between O'Neill and Teal'c.
Hey, come on!
I have nowhere to go.
For this, you can stay at my place. Let's go!
As the group make their way back to the gate, Teal'c introduces himself to O'Neill, and we get some well-needed and well-written world building.
Anyone who does not exist to serve the gods is their enemy.
And that makes you...
I am a Jafar, bred to serve, that they may live.
I don't understand.
The hell is that? It is an infant Goa'uld, the larval form of the gods.
Get it out of there.
In exchange for carrying the infant Goa'uld until maturity, the Jafar receives perfect health and long life.
As they're nearing the gate, a death glider starts swooping and shooting at them. That's what they call the death glider. The practical explosions in this action sequence looks great and gets you reeling in tension. As the death glider seemingly makes its final approach towards O'Neill and Teal'c, Kowalski comes to the rescue with a big old RPG and shoots the death glider down. At the gate, Apophis notices this and looks embarrassed before he and Amunet step through the gate to who knows where. As they rush to the gate, O'Neill notices Skara, now host to an as-yet unnamed Goa'uld, about to step through the gate. He rushes over and attempts to communicate to Skara. However, a smirk appears on Skara's face and his eyes glowed before O'Neill is launched back by Skara's hand device, and he disappears through the gate. The gate disconnects before anybody can see the address. As the deadline approaches, members of SG-2, O'Neill, and Teal'c struggle to fend off a whole garrison of Jafar while Daniel struggles to find the right combination to dial back to Earth, while Carter is ready to key in her iris code as soon as the wormhole connects. It's actually quite amusing seeing Daniel have a whole-ass notebook with multiple pages to flick through, since later on it's never really dwelled on by the writers, as the characters, especially Daniel and Carter, seem to have memorized a few addresses to safe locations. Once again, the practical effects with the explosions in this action sequence is so cool and bombastic. It's a really effective and exciting sequence as the two-parter starts to wrap up. Fortunately, Daniel manages to dial the Earth gate and the code is sent through just before the code is about to be blocked. Carter starts to lead the refugee prisoners through the gate. As the refugees make their way through the gate first, SG-2 and our soldier boys are slowly pushed further and further back from the onslaught of Jafar, and in the chaos, one of Kowalski's men, Casey, is injured and shot down. And while Kowalski struggles to get him through the gate, an infant Goa'uld from a nearby dead Jafar slithers out and inserts itself into Kowalski's body. Oh no! O'Neill helps Kowalski with Casey, and they are the last to jump through the gate and make their way back to Earth. As soon as they arrive, the iris is shut closed and we hear the iconically dark thuds from the iris. The refugees all rush at our soldier boys, thankful for their rescue, and Hammond is wary of Teal'c's presence, but O'Neill explains that they survived because of Teal'c, and he straight up recommends Teal'c to join SG-1, surprising not only Carter, Hammond, and the other soldiers, but even Teal'c himself. As the SGC start to process the refugees, the show reiterates one final time the emotional calls to action for the audience, finding and saving Shara and Skara. There is this awesome shot of the members of SG-1 standing on the ramp in front of the Stargate, and as they start to leave the ramp, Kowalski is revealed to be behind them, the enemy within the SGC. You'll see what I did there in a few moments. As the camera tracks forward to Kowalski, similar to what the camera did to Hammond at the end of the cold open, Kowalski breaks the fourth wall and stares straight down at the camera as his eyes glowed menacingly, successfully setting up the series' direction going forward and giving the audience a more immediate reason to tune in to the next episode. Fade to black, end of pilot, it's a wrap, done and dusted. Let's all take a deep breath, stand up and stretch, grab some water, make some tea or coffee, and I'll give you my final rating for the pilot episode. All in all, I think it's obvious already, but I love this pilot two-parter. What a suitable follow-up to such an adventurous and excitingly fun film. Obviously, as it's a TV show and not a blockbuster film, the budget difference is significant, but it had the same heroic, warm feeling that the feature film had. Children of the Gods still stands for me as one of the best series premieres ever, and though not perfect, it's still one of the best episodes in the whole franchise. So it's a 9 out of 10 for me. This episode serves as the direct follow-up to the events of the pilot two-parter. Due to the events of the pilot two-parter, the Goa'uld have repeatedly sent Jafar and weapons over to Earth, only to be smooshed by the Irish. Due to the events of the pilot two-parter, the Goa'uld have repeatedly sent Jafar and weapons over to Earth, only to be smooshed by the Iris.
Closing the iris!
Because of Apophyse's surprise inspection in the pilot two-parter, there is now a procedure to deal with an unscheduled off-world wormhole activation. The Iris automatically being brought up and the base auto-destruct timer being set to 3 minutes, just in case the Iris doesn't hold. O'Neill's bugs on a windshield is so dark and humorous and creates such a ghastly picture in the audience's heads.
Well, there gotta be worse ways to go, I suppose.
I don't think the Goa'ulds are sending people through, do you?
Be like bugs on a windshield.
Kowalski makes a comment how part of him wants to lower the Iris and let the Jafar soldiers come through so that they could, and I quote, give them the fight they're looking for. Which could very well be implying the infant Goa'uld's control over him starting to break through. Kowalski seems to have a strong migraine coming in and is ordered to get checked up once more in the infirmary. As Kowalski leaves, another off-world wormhole activates and the thuds begin again. Dana questions whether or not the Iris will hold, and O'Neill's sarcastic, "Ah, good," is comedic genius.
So this Iris is gonna hold, right?
Pure titanium, less than 3 micrometers from the event horizon. It won't even allow matter to fully reintegrate.
So this Iris is gonna hold, right?
If it doesn't, the fail-safe device will detonate, this whole mountain will vaporize, and there'll be nothing to worry about.
Ah, good.
This brings us to the brand new proper opening title sequence. Woo. The two main plot lines for this episode are Kowalski's parasitic problems and Teal'c's status on Earth. They both happen concurrently to each other, and the episode flicks back and forth to update the viewers on both at the same time. But let's deal with Teal'c's storyline first. After the title sequence, O'Neill is informed by Hammond that he is forced to reject O'Neill's recommendation for Teal'c to join SG-1. Instead, a Colonel Kennedy from the Pentagon will come to the SGC and interrogate Teal'c for information, and possibly run tests on him. This contention and apparent unsureness of Teal'c's real allegiance makes up most of his plot points in the first half of this season. However, Hammond does promise that Teal'c will be treated fairly and with dignity, and that appeases O'Neill's worries temporarily. While visiting Teal'c and updating him on what's going to happen, we get told of the Goa'uld's arrogance when Teal'c explains that soon the attacks would stop, since the Goa'uld would believe that all the troops and weapons they've sent through the gate to Earth would have razed the planet, and they would not send more warriors through the gate for a while to make sure of our destruction. Teal'c asks if he's a prisoner, and O'Neill tells him the truth out of respect. Teal'c is really understanding about the whole situation, and we get to see his stoic and mindful nature. Only a few things causes him to lose his cool, and we'll get to see that in due course. When Teal'c asks O'Neill why the latter is not afraid, O'Neill's response is amazing character work, both on the writer's end as well as RDA's end.
We tend to be afraid of things we don't know.
Why is O'Neill not afraid?
Teal'c, I saw you stand up to a god. You refused to kill. I saw you make that decision.
Yes.
In that moment, I learned everything I needed to know to trust you.
If I had killed you then, I would not be here now.
Neither would I.
I will prove my allegiance, O'Neill.
Teal'c, I sure wish you didn't have to.
This scene hits hard and shows you how much respect and trust O'Neill already has for Teal'c in such a short but pivotal moment. This bond continues to grow over the seasons, and it's amazing to watch. Later, Teal'c meets with Colonel Kennedy, played by actor Alan Rakins, and as Kennedy starts to question Teal'c, it becomes quickly apparent that due to the nature of the relationship between Jafar and Goa'uld, Teal'c is unable to provide Kennedy with any useful scientific information about Goa'uld technology and capabilities. Since Jafar are taught that the Goa'uld are gods, they most likely prevented the Jafar from learning how their technology actually works, instead playing it off as miracles and magic. What information Teal'c can provide is extremely vague, though he does reveal that, like the creation story in the Caves of Abydos, the Goa'uld race perhaps had a near-extinction event, but now their numbers are growing. Though expository, this scene is a great way to universe build, as Teal'c explains the basic state of the galaxy under Goa'uld rule, and he ultimately reveals that the Goa'uld has no need for peace. Teal'c reveals that even without the ability to travel by Stargate, if they wanted to, the Goa'uld can use their spaceships to travel through space to Earth, even if it takes them months or years to get there. And the only reason why they haven't yet is...
we're not that much of a nuisance just yet.
When Kennedy asks Teal'c about where the Goa'uld gets their slaves from, Teal'c tells him of an old tale. Actually, I'll let Teal'c tell it.
Slaves, where do they come from?
There is a tale of a primitive world the Goa'uld discovered millennia ago, the Tari. First world where forms of this type evolved. It is said the Goa'uld harvested among the primitives. Some became Goa'uld hosts, others became Jafar. The rest were taken as slaves and seated among the stars to serve them. The world has been lost for centuries.
The tale is the first mention of the Tauri, and doesn't it sound very familiar to the origin legend in the feature film? That's right, Earth is the primitive world and the Tauri are humans. Let's not gloss over the fact that Jafar are humans that have been experimented on also. They'll come up in a future episode. The tale also explains how the human prisoners from other planets were around in the events of the pilot two-parter. Teal'c is shocked when Kennedy and O'Neill explain that Earth is the primitive world that the tale mentioned, and it turns out that the successful ancient rebellion and burial of the gate that allowed humanity on Earth to evolve enough to become a viable threat against the Goa'uld. This revelation gives Teal'c more hope in his dreams of a Jafar rebellion against the Goa'uld. Anyway, in the infirmary, as the Dr. Nimziki, examines Kowalski, he notices a bump on Kowalski's back. The bump suddenly shifts and climbs up Kowalski's spine as the Goa'uld takes over Kowalski's body and he kills the Doctor. In the conference room above the gate room, Daniel and Carter are explaining the DHD to presumably the leaders of other SG teams that have yet to go on their first mission. And they describe the DHD like a telephone, which leads to the first utterance of the phone analogy when talking about the Stargate, when they mentioned that using the DHD dials the Stargate back to Earth. Daniel notices Kowalski in the gate room as Carter draws a familiar cube drawing. Kowalski looks zoinked out as he gazes at the Stargate, and by the time Hammond and O'Neill reach the gate room, he seemingly snaps out of it, revealing to them that he blacked out. We cut back to the infirmary, where there's seemingly no doctor on call. Remember, Kowalski just killed him. A Dr. Warner enters the infirmary and apologizes. Dr. Warner is a recurring character that appears over a number of episodes throughout the first few seasons. He is played by Kevin McNulty, who's probably most well known for appearing in the first incarnation of the Fantastic Four movies and Snakes on a Plane, though I recognized him from his guest role in another great show, Psych. Considering the nature of Kowalski's headaches, Warren decides to do an MRI scan on Kowalski. The MRI reveals the Goa'uld larva in Kowalski, and Warren tries to covertly get Kowalski to practically be under arrest. But for a military base, does that make it base arrest? Uh-oh, the Goa'uld larva has taken over Kowalski's body, and Dr. Warren turns on the base alarm. Let's call this angry fellow, Goa'uld Kowalski. At the same time, when Carter tells Daniel to try to sleep, he discovers Nimziki's dead body in the top bunk. Kowalski makes his way to the control room and attempts to dial the gate back to Chulak. Carter is able to raise the alarm and notify the emergency in the control room and is taken hostage by Kowalski. Kowalski reveals he can speak when he orders Carter to help him. Kowalski takes Carter to the elevator to try to go to the surface, but she gets knocked out in the most underwhelming way when she's thrown back after being able to press the emergency stop. Unfortunately, the stunt isn't that good for this shot, but oh well. By the time the soldiers are able to open the elevator doors, Kowalski is back in control of his body. Unfortunately, now everyone knows something's up with him. Soon after, we see Kowalski strapped up in this cool-looking thingy as Dr. Warren is explaining the situation. I'll let him do it.
Parasite's wrapped around his spine.
Kowalski's actor, Jay Ackervone, gets to act his heart out in these scenes, where he's helplessly strapped up. When Kowalski finds out he has an infant Goa'uld that hadn't properly matured yet in him, and that's why he's been blacking out instead of being completely taken over, my heart hurts watching these scenes. This scene is played straight and serious, almost complete silence, except for the dialogue and the hum of the medical machinery. The shots are all close-ups and extreme close-ups of Daniel, O'Neill, and Kowalski, as Kowalski grapples with the fact that he has an enemy parasite in him. It's amazing performances and filmmaking all around.
It was a sharp... Oh, God, Jack. I thought I wrenched my neck. Oh, God, Jack, you gotta help me. You gotta get this thing out of me.
That's the plan.
And when Kowalski finds out he's hurt people when he blacked out, he breaks down even more. It's just so sad.
When I was out, did I hurt anybody?
There's one man dead, a few more hurt.
Oh, I didn't mean that.
No, she doesn't blame you.
You're not responsible, Charlie. It's not your fault. It's that damn thing that's inside of you.
The plan now is to try to remove the Goa'uld larva from Kowalski, though it would be a difficult operation as the larva has nestled itself just under Kowalski's brain and woven itself around Kowalski's nervous system. The operation would most likely make Kowalski a quadriplegic, and since the parasite seems to take over his body while he's blacked out, Dr. Warren advises that they'll have to leave Kowalski without any painkillers to keep him alert. Due to Teal'c having a Goa'uld larva in him, Kennedy, Hammond, and O'Neill approach him in his cell and checks whether or not the Goa'uld in Kowalski was originally Teal'c's. It's not, but it's realistic that Kennedy had to make sure that it wasn't all another incursion plan to gain a foothold on Earth. Teal'c reveals that once the Goa'uld parasite matures enough to be one with the host, it's able to kill the host outright. This gives our characters a time limit to go against and raises the stakes, now that they know that the Goa'uld can hold Kowalski's life over their heads. Though Teal'c is confident that the Goa'uld parasite won't let Kowalski go, they go to Kowalski anyway to try and negotiate with him, leave Kowalski's body and gain freedom. Kowalski is not having any of it and accidentally loses control as he screams for them to take the Goa'uld out of him and kill it. Kowalski takes over and a futile attempt at negotiation occurs. Kowalski attempts to free itself and threatens everybody. Since the parasite is still weak though, Kowalski manages to regain control, somewhat de-escalating this situation. During a brainstorming meeting, Kennedy suggests that they let the Goa'uld take over Kowalski's body to study the parasite. Kowalski's chances of surviving the operation is 12% at best, and according to Kennedy, would probably die in vain, since the parasite would be killed in the operation.
What are Major Kowalski's chances of surviving the procedure?
10, 12% at most.
And the parasite? It is an intelligent being after all, isn't it, Colonel? I believe I first read that in your report.
The parasite itself would not survive the procedure.
So, we're faced with destroying one life in the hopeless attempt to save another.
He mentions that the case is an ethical dilemma, but it's complete bullshit. After debasing Teal'c by describing him and Jafar in general as mere incubators for infant Goa'uld, he questions how the infant parasites could be so intelligent, and Teal'c exposits that Goa'uld have genetic memory. If anybody is unaware of what genetic memory is, it's a theory where certain behaviors, instincts, or knowledge can be passed down from one generation to the next through genetic material. Though it's generally considered as false, the theory is sometimes used to explain how certain animals seem to react in a certain way. For example, a cat's stereotypical negative inclination to dogs, or how certain species of birds seem to know exactly when to migrate for the winter. For gamers like me, genetic memory is infamously showcased to explain how the Animus works in the Assassin's Creed series of games. Everyone is against the idea, of course, and even Teal'c is unconvinced that the military will be able to convince the Goa'uld to share his knowledge with humanity. I mean, bro, did you not just see the kind of disrespect the Goa'uld spat at the goat Hammond? I can kind of see where Kennedy is coming from if I squint really, really hard, but Hammond's reaction to what Kennedy is suggesting is amazing.
Just what kind of an officer are you, Colonel?
Sir?
As long as there is a snowball's chance in hell that my officer will come out of this procedure alive, we'll go ahead with it.
Nobody gets left behind, nobody gets abandoned. Kennedy is obviously either a silver spoon kind of soldier, being given a position in the Pentagon / military that he doesn't really deserve, or he's been in a cushy job for so long that he's lost sight of the true moral essence of what it means to be a soldier. Absolutely riled up by Kennedy, Hammond orders the operation to be performed ASAP and dismisses everyone. Seriously, Hammond is an absolute legend. Teal'c volunteers to let Dr. Warner experiment on different anesthetics on his pouch Goa'uld to figure out which anesthetic would work on the Goa'uld in Kowalski to prevent it from retaliating. Because of the high risk that he might die, Kowalski informs O'Neill what he wants to be done with his body. He ruminates sadly on never going to get to experience his first real command as the leader of SG-2 on an independent mission. O'Neill's usage of humor shows us how much Kowalski's situation is affecting him.
If you don't make it, can I have your stereo?
We cut to the operation scene. The setup looks amazing. The shot of the huge anesthetic needle going into Kowalski's back is amazing. The CG on the screens showing the parasite being pulled is kind of goofy, but the whole practical picking out the Goa'uld parasite is icky, but amazing. Also, the size of the parasite carcass Dr. Warner pulls out gives me shivers when I think about it being wrapped around Kowalski's nervous system. Among the people watching the operation is Daniel, who is extremely interested about the operation.
If we can reverse what's happened to the Major, then there's still a chance for Shara.
After the surgery, Kowalski wakes up and miraculously still can move his fingers and toes. The operation was a success, though not all is well, as Kennedy informs Hammond that he'll be going back to Langley with the parasite carcass and Teal'c for further testing. Everyone that we care about is unhappy that Teal'c is being treated this way. After all the help he's willingly given to them, Kowalski tells Carter that he'd like to thank Teal'c for his help before they take him away. Teal'c meets with Kowalski, and after getting some privacy, it's been Kowalski all along. Teal'c shows his conviction when he rejects Kowalski's advances and is incapacitated. Kowalski then breaks out of the infirmary and makes his way to the Stargate. Our boy Walter attempts to stop Kowalski but gets his wrist broken for the trouble. And Kowalski starts the dialing process to Chulak and the self-destruct sequence, which triggers an automatic alarm throughout the base. Teal'c meets Kowalski in the gate room and a wrestling match begins. It's interesting to note that even though Kowalski looks physically smaller than Teal'c, he's still strong enough to almost choke Teal'c a second time. O'Neill and Hammond override the self-destruct sequence and they manage to shut down the wormhole as Kowalski's head is slightly submerged into the event horizon, causing the back of Kowalski's head to dematerialize, killing him. It's nice that when O'Neill goes down on his knees next to Kowalski's body, Teal'c follows in respect. Later, as Carter and Daniel are heading to the gate room, Carter believes that Kowalski knowing the self-destruct code should give everyone hope for Skara and Shara, as only Kowalski knew the code, and that proves that something of the host must survive. Hammond uses his connection with the president to override Kennedy's Pentagon bosses' order to take Teal'c away, and he officially joins SG-1. Yay! The episode ends as the titular team steps through the gate to P-3575, even though we don't see what the mission ends up being. It's another strong episode coming out of the production, and is another episode full of setting up future concepts for the series. It sets up Teal'c's loyalty towards the Tauri. Though Kowalski was not a main cast, it raises the stakes for our main characters that at any mission, there is a possibility that they might become a host to a Goa'uld parasite, which, though not always at the forefront of the viewer's mind, will always be a nagging sense of tension as they watch the show. The struggle between Hammond's power and as the commander of the SGC and other departments of the US military is established, and is a recurring point of contention and tension throughout the series. And finally, that there is hope that something of the host survives even after the Goa'uld becomes one with them. This episode sits at a respectful 8.5 out of 10 for me. The same cannot be said by the next episode. To begin with, I'm not blaming the subjective state of this episode, as this whole video is from my opinions, on the writer Catherine Powers or the director Jeff Woolnough. Both have had tremendous experience writing and directing episodes, respectively, before and after SG-1, with Powers writing episodes for shows like Kung Fu, Star Trek The Next Generation, and Charlie's Angels, and was the executive story consultant for SG-1 Season 1, while Woolnough has worked on shows like Vikings, Saving Hope, and even The Expanse. They're both extremely talented. I think the problems with this episode stems from, one, The short production cycle, because of the deal with Showtime, meant they had to use Emancipation to fill out an episode slot. And 2, having an episode where the message is bluntly, sexism is bad, women strong too, does not make a fun watch. Future episode Hathor does the whole sexism, especially in the military, is bad, much better in my opinion, and since it doesn't have too much importance in setting up the whole series mythology, I'll just go by the synopsis written on the wiki. On the seemingly peaceful planet of Samarkand, the team encounter a race of Mongol-like humans whose women have no rights whatsoever. Things turn bad when the team realizes Carter has been kidnapped and sold to an enemy tribe led by Turgan, and her teammates search for her. Carter fights to dismantle a series of ground rules on a planet where women are seen as objects instead of human beings. We never return to Samarkand, though we do see clips from this episode in the future in clip shows. However, the episode does have the first mention of an unseen SG-1 mission when O'Neill references a mission to P3X-595.
Remember that time on P3X-595? You drank that stuff that made you take off?
We won't get into that right now.
Looking at the wiki, it's interesting that Catherine Powers is also responsible for a very similar episode for Star Trek The Next Generation. Both are the 4th episodes of their first seasons. Both feature a female officer being abducted and later participating in a fight to the death. Both female officers survive, and both episodes having similar reception. In fact, in reading about this episode online, apparently this episode is generally considered one of the worst episodes in the entirety of Stargate SG-1. And even the Sci-Fi channel also didn't like it that much, because when the show is being rerun in syndication, they usually skip from Enemy Within to the Broca Divide. I mean, fair enough, Broca is a much better follow-up. What's cool about this episode is that they had a few pretty cool guest stars, such as Keri Hiroyuki Tagawa, who seemed so familiar to me, and it wasn't until looking at his IMDb page that I realized he played motherfricking Shang Tsung in the 1995 Mortal Kombat movie, and he's been voicing Shang Tsung in Mortal Kombat X and 11. And Sun Teko as Mughal wasn't a massively well-known actor in live action, mostly getting guest starring roles in shows like Magnum P.I., MASH, and Charlie's Angels, but he is most well known for his voice acting work as Fa Zhu, Fa Mulan's father in Mulan. And Crystal Lowe as Naya. Naya was Lowe's first screen role, and she comes back to the Stargate franchise when she plays the role of Mardola in the Stargate Atlantis episode Harmony, which is a great episode. Can't wait to rewatch it. Overall, I give the episode 4 out of 10. Not terrible, but I would have skipped it had I not been making this video. This episode is literally a filler. The episode starts strong by mentioning the refugees that SG-1 and SG-2 rescued at the end of Children of the Gods. After interviewing them, the SGC has 4 of the symbols in the gate address that Apophis entered. They must have seen it from the top of the ridge somehow, even though the ridge was really far away, but who cares. The mission they're going on for this episode is one of the 3 possible addresses the program Carter helped make had extrapolated from the 4 symbols. Will this be the right one? Of course not. This is only the 5th episode in a long-running series, but kudos on the positive outlook. In this episode, SG-1 will be accompanied by SG-3. SG-3 comprises of Marines and assumedly is the more military action-based team of the SG teams. The director, William Goretti, does make a point of showing the obviously dubious looks SG-3 are giving to Tilt. The reason why SG-3 are coming with SG-1 in this mission is that the other end of the gate is so dark that the SGC analysts can't see anything in the video feed before it was ultimately broken. Since they don't want to accidentally go into an ambush, SG-3 is covering their asses. This won't make too much of a difference considering the main thread of the episode, but we'll get to it when we get to it. A funny comment made by O'Neill before they embark is,
Here's a question. Why doesn't the MALP have a set of these?
And in future episodes, the MALP does get fitted with night vision capabilities, so it's nice that the show actually does something with what is seemingly an ad-libbed, totally in-character line said by RDA. Interestingly, in the episode they do a fade transition from the wormhole animation to the alien planet. I seem to remember that only using hard cuts. Maybe at this point in time it hadn't been added to the show-making rulebook or something like that. The alien planet that they arrive at seemed to be some sort of forest, and it's extremely dark. For the characters anyway, not us viewers. This isn't Game of Thrones Season 8. Soon after arriving, SG-1 is ambushed by what seems to look like cave people. They're saved by SG-3, who arrived on the planet after them and use their guns to shoot and scare the ambushers. Everyone seems to have gotten out of the ambush with a couple of cuts, except for O'Neill, who seemed to have gotten a substantial one on his brow. Hopefully nothing bad comes from this ambush. The two SG teams find a cave people camp and witness what looks like to be an attack on the camp by natives dressed in white. When confronted by the SG teams, they find that the natives in white seem to be humans, not Goa'ulds. The natives in white reveal themselves to be the Untouched. One of the natives in white is named Tuplo, and he'll come back in the series, so it's nice to have a name for him. The Untouched seem to think that the SG teams are gods since they're ascended enough to use the Stargate. Tuplo leads them to what he calls the Land of Light. The Land of Light is situated literally out of the forest, and we see that the forest is naturally dark in this world. And they have a normal looking woman that was being held prisoner in the cave people camp, and she's brought out with them. This is Tuplo's daughter. The attack was originally a rescue mission for her. When they arrive at the temple, Daniel remarks that the temple looks Minoan. According to Wikipedia, the Minoan civilization is a Bronze Age civilization of Crete that flourished from about 3000 BCE to about 1100 BCE. But hang on, Minoan and Crete aren't Egyptian. This shows the Land of Light's relative primitiveness to Earth's. This comes back in a future episode of the season. The Untouched call the cave people the Touched. They tell SG-1 of a legend of a curse, and that the Touched were touched by a Hilkshah. Dano mentions a similar phrase in Abydosian, and Hilk further translates it in Japanese by saying that it means gods of the underworld, or in other words, evil gods. After being told that the good gods, the Goa'uld, hadn't arrived on the planet in a generation, O'Neill informs the others to get ready to return home. Daniel is a bit disappointed because he loves him some anthropology and wants to study the culture, but O'Neill reminds him of the primary objective of the mission, which was to try and find the address of Entered so they can chase after Skara and Share. During debriefing, Daniel makes his argument that studying the cultures on the alien planets could be really useful and important. And this provides it with a really cool segue to the episode title.
This really isn't necessary, doctors. I've already...
Sir, would you let me finish, please? The people on the dark side are pre-Stone Age, but the people on the light side are clearly from the Bronze Age, so what better opportunity to study the Broca Divide?
What? Excuse me.
Surprising Daniel especially, Hammond reveals that the president agrees with him on the importance of studying these cultures on their planets, and that a follow-up mission to study the culture is already scheduled.
He won the argument.
But I have to insist that you... What? I've already won?
The president agrees with you. He's asked that we evaluate the scientific and cultural value of each mission from now on.
Oh, for crying out loud.
He has.
That's great.
During this one-sided argument, we see the same Marine that looked at Teal'c dubiously earlier look at Teal'c with a great deal more malice, and before long, the dude practically leaps over the table and acts all out of character for military personnel. Or maybe it's in character. Depends on your opinion on the military, I guess. The Marine is frothing at the mouth, and there's obviously something wrong here, but what exactly? We'll explain later.
We will explain later.
Life in the SGC seemed to continue on as normal, but that's quickly changed when two unnamed Marines seem to go violently out of control and smash through the conference room glass, which is at the top floor of the whole gate room set. It's a great stunt, and it leaves one soldier dead, while you could see the other one still moving around a little. In the very next scene, Carter seems to be out of control herself, but in a different way. O'Neill's line here is hilarious, but it shows you his honor and character when he gets her to the infirmary.
Carter, sorry, I didn't know you were in here.
Oh!
Hey!
What the hell's going on?
I want you.
Why? I didn't know.
You want me?
No. Oh, not like this. Right off the... It's about time you saw a doctor.
This episode is also the first appearance of one of the greatest recurring characters in the whole franchise, Dr. Janet Fraser. She's played by the brilliant Terrell Rothery, who's done quite a lot of voice acting work for Canadian dubs of animes such as Inuyasha and Dragon Ball. Janet, we call her Janet here, shows O'Neill the Marine status. His name is Johnson. And we see that he has started to develop a strong, ridged brow. She explains that whatever is affecting the people is spreading and it's making them act like primitives. There's this hilarious interaction between Daniel and O'Neill when Daniel tries to tell him that he's been researching I'm just gonna say cave people, Neanderthals.
Got on the internet to do a little research on Australopithecus, and wow, what happened to you?
Oh, I got in a little wrestling match with Carter.
Why?
I guess she's got whatever Johnson's got. I had to drag her off to the infirmary.
Would she start a fight with you like Johnson did with Teal'c?
No, she tried to seduce me.
Oh. You poor man.
Unfortunately, it seems that O'Neill is finally starting to be affected by whatever is spreading around. He quickly turns into Ape Neil. Due to Janet's testing, she's found that there is some sort of virus in the blood samples of all the people that are affected. Daniel makes the connection that the virus is what's causing the untouched to turn into the touched. And for some reason, Daniel and Teal'c seem to be immune. Teal'c's symbiote likely protects Teal'c from the virus's effects, though they're still not sure why Daniel is immune so far. Hammond's line here kinda hits hard, considering the SGC's early track record of things going wrong in missions have been pretty shocking.
You're saying we could have brought a new plague to this planet?
Yes, sir, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Remember that they almost got killed in Children of the Gods, and unknowingly bring back a Goa'uld symbiote. Whatever happened to Carter on P3X595 in the Unseen Mission, and now this whole outbreak. What's really awesome though, like the Malp earlier in the episode, and the brand new procedures shown at the start of The Enemy Within, new procedures to prevent certain almost catastrophic events are constantly being developed, shown, and then used by characters. And it creates a sense that the world is alive, though certain aspects of the show are very episodic, and each episode returns to a sort of status quo. The backdrop, the world, continues to evolve and change. This is the first episode of many that showcase how terrific of an actor RDA is. He's able to portray pain and anguish really well, and in this episode he is extremely physical, and the guttural noises that he's able to produce is uncanny, and also adds to his depiction of a primitive human. Due to the ever-increasing spread of the virus and the SGC's inability to curb the spread of it, Hammond is forced to inform the president that the Cheyenne Mountain complex should be put on quarantine and...
Well, sir, my recommendation is that anyone attempting to leave the mountain should be shot on sight and their body burned.
A desperate mission to get a blood sample of one of the untouched is given the go-ahead by Hammond, and Teal'c and Daniel quickly return to the land of the dark forest, where unfortunately Daniel is ambushed and taken to a touch camp. Oh, and Tupou's daughter has been dumped in the forest again. Seems like she was infected after all. Teal'c manages to return to the temple, and due to their primitive beliefs, the untouched refuse to let Teal'c get a sample of their blood, believing it to be their life force. On his way out, and recognizing that nobody else was around, Teal'c knocks out the two guards and grabs a blood sample out of one of them. While this is happening, Janet brings a sedated and infected Hammond to share a bunk with Ape Neil. When she gives Ape Neil an especially big dose of sedatives, some of his old self returns. The sedative seems to hold back some of their primitive urges, allowing O'Neill and Janet to communicate to each other. She mentions that after studying the way the virus works, she's realized that it feeds on histamine, which in turn creates havoc in chemical levels in the body and causing the symptoms. Ape Neil tells her to experiment on him when they get a suitable and promising cure. When Teal'c returns, I find it funny that Janet just casually drops the fact that Carter got stabbed by her roommate off screen.
Thank God you're back.
What happened to Captain Carter?
She was stabbed by her roommate. Don't worry, it's superficial. She's going to be okay.
I'll bring it up now because it's just a really funny line, and it also provides a callback for the characters at the end of the episode. There's a great scene of Teal'c visiting O'Neill, and this mirrors how O'Neill visited Teal'c in Enemy Within, and the look of sorrow on Teal'c's face at the story state of Ape Neil is really powerful. Anywho, sometime later, Janet comes into the room and explains the whole situation to Ape Neil and Teal'c. The untouched blood samples show very little histamine in it, and we find out that the reason why Daniel was immune, and why Janet is also immune, is because they both take powerful antihistamines every day. Since the virus feeds on histamine, when there isn't enough histamine in someone's body, the virus just starves and dies. To check if her hypothesis is correct, she needs someone infected to be injected by a lot of antihistamines. And even though it might be dangerous, since histamine is a naturally occurring chemical compound, Ape Neil volunteers. The injection works, and an unknown amount of time later, O'Neill is back to normal, and this great interaction happens between him and Teal'c.
Doc, open the door. Tail!
Colonel O'Neill?
Lucy, I'm home.
I am not Lucy.
Sometime later, again, SG-1 and backup returns to the Land of the Dark with dart guns and darts with the antihistamine cure. Luckily, Daniel is still alive and relatively well, now as an untouched, as his daily antihistamine dose had worn off. Our soldier boys proceed to knock out every untouched they find and make their way back to the Land of the Light Temple. The untouched there are a little salty, the guards more than others when they see Teal'c again. As they wait for Daniel to return to normal, SG-1 tried to explain to the untouched that the touched were not cursed, they were just sick. And it's not until Daniel wakes up, all normal-like, that the untouched finally seem to start to believe. When the untouched loved ones start to walk out of the forest all healed and normal, they are grateful and thankful for SG-1's involvement. And the episode ends on a light-hearted note, as they often do, because it gives the air of all's well that ends well, and this one is pretty funny.
About my earlier behavior, I wasn't myself.
Oh, Carter, I don't even remember your earlier behavior. By the way, how's the wound?
It's nothing. With any luck, there won't even be a scar.
Good. I was concerned.
You were?
Sure. If it doesn't heal properly, you'll never wear that sweet little tank top number again.
Like I said earlier, though episodes of SG-1 generally have an episodic nature to them, returning to some sort of status quo, the world keeps spinning and changing. The events of this episode have consequences in later episodes, as the SGC end up having a quarantine procedure after every mission just to ensure that nothing like the outbreak in this episode happens again. Tupelo and the untouched people of the Land of the Light end up being the first allies of the Towery in SG-1, and in particular Tupelo will appear once more later on in the series. So this episode is important in that regard also. In my opinion, one of the biggest positives that this episode has over the extremely disappointing Emancipation is that the Broca Divide is a strong universe building episode. Oh, and apparently Colonel Robert Makepeace, the leader of SG-3, is a recurring character, and this episode is the first appearance of him, so there's that too. Overall, the episode is pretty fun, and so I give it a 7.5 out of 10. This episode is a pretty wild episode, as it is the first episode in which another human from Earth, another Towery, is the antagonist. It also serves as the very first episode written by Robert C. Cooper, future co-showrunner of SG-1 and co-creator of both Stargate Atlantis and Stargate Universe with Brad Wright. Robert C. Cooper created so many aspects of the mythology of SG-1 that became pivotal in shaping the series and the franchise as a whole. And it's fascinating to see that his first story was this episode. He also served as the executive story editor for many of the episodes in the first 2 seasons, as well as writing and co-writing in some form or another, and not including excerpts. 50 freaking 1 episodes of SG-1. That's just under a quarter of the whole series. Keep that in mind. William Russ plays the character of Captain Jonas Hansen so well in this episode. The manic insanity that bubbles underneath the surface, the way he performs his lines, the way he just chews up each scene that he's in. Hansen is a great antagonist of the week, and as the series' first episode that focuses mainly on Carter's character, we don't count Emancipation, it's an engaging episode. So what happens in it? Well, it's basically Apocalypse Now, but the science fiction version. The events of the episode take place on the planet the SGC designated as P3X513. On the wiki, it's also known as Avnor, so I'll just keep referencing it as Avnor. Avnor is a planet inhabited by a primitive human colony, that has been abandoned by the Goa'uld hundreds of years ago. Because the planet is lacking proper atmospheric protection, the inhabitants are forced to live in ancient mining caves to avoid getting greatly exposed to UV radiation. Sometime before the events of the episode, when SG-9 arrived, Hansen ordered his team to cater to the natives' belief that they were gods. A few weeks after first contact, a native girl ventured out of the caves onto the surface, and Hansen, the leader of SG-9, followed to try to save the girl. He was gone for 2 days, and when he finally came back burnt from the UV radiation carrying the girl, who also barely survived, the natives loved Hansen. This experience, however, changed Hansen's personality drastically, most probably because of the dehydration and the length of time spent outside in the heat. It made Hansen go insane, believing himself to actually be a god. Hansen currently has ordered the natives to build him a temple, and it seems to be a high priority task, even if it meant the natives die while making the temple. In the cold open, 2 of Hansen's men who disagree with his actions attempt to escape from him and the natives. One, a Lieutenant Lawrence Connor, manages to dial the gate back to Earth and enter the SG-9 iris code, but ultimately did not go through, while the other, a Lieutenant Thomas Frakes, is captured, executed, and body burnt by Hansen and his group. SG-1 is tasked with finding out why SG-9 has not returned from Avnor. On the planet, SG-1 quickly find Connor, who gives them the lowdown of what has happened on Avnor. They decide to camp for the night, only to be ambushed by a native patrol, who are scared away by the modern weaponry in SG-1's available arsenal. Unfortunately, during the chaos, Connor escaped as he is determined to kill Hansen. The next day, as SG-1 makes their way towards the caves and the temple build site, we find out that Carter used to be engaged to Hansen. That's right. This is the start of Carter's really bad luck with men. Should we do a counter for it? I'm not too sure. When they arrive at a viewpoint near to the temple site and caves, they notice that Connor had been captured. Carter goes against O'Neill's orders and gets herself captured by Hansen's men when she stops them from brutally beating up a young man, and she's quickly brought into the caves to meet with Hansen. We'll get to their scenes later. Now that both Carter and Connor require a rescue, the SG-1 men confront Jamala, the slave Carter saved from being beaten up. And through questioning Jamala, SG-1 finds out that the natives believe and follow Hansen's orders because he claims to have found something that would turn the sky orange. This piques Teal'c's interest, and he informs them of Goa'uld technology that does turn the sky orange, a solar radiation shield that was assumedly abandoned by the Goa'uld when the mines were dried out centuries ago. Teal'c then reveals that Hansen's plan would not work, as the Goa'uld technology requires 2 of the machines to work together as the shield bounce from one machine to the other, creating the dome of protection. There is a great moment between Jamala and Teal'c in this scene.
This is the valley. Here's the Stargate. Here's the temple.
Good drawing.
Thank you.
It just gives Jamala enough character for viewers to care about him. And the way Teal'c's eyebrow raises as if it's saying something like, "I'm glad that somebody recognizes my talent," is a really good touch to build upon an aspect of Teal'c's character. O'Neill orders Jamala, Teal'c, and Daniel to go and find the second machine, while he dresses up in Jamala's clothes to try and save Connor. Now, while this is happening, Carter meets with Hansen in the caves, and realizes that Hansen has become self-obsessed and lost in his own megalomania. Hansen reveals to Carter the history of the native people of Avnor, and that he found the Goa'uld shield technology. He tells her that he's making the natives build a temple to give him time to work out how to activate the technology. But now that Carter is here, she can do it for him. There's a great moment between Hansen and Carter when Carter manages to get a pistol and tries to force him at gunpoint to surrender. Hansen's belief in his own godliness calls her bluff, and unfortunately, it was just that, a bluff, as Carter is unable to shoot him. This scene by itself is enough to rectify Carter's clunky writing in the pilot 2-parter, as well as the travesty that is Emancipation. And Amanda Tapping gets to stretch her acting chops a little.
You're gonna have to use it, Sam. Still loaded. Pull the trigger.
Do it! Because so help me, that is the only way you're gonna stop me.
Killing their savior might irritate them a little, but at least I'd be gone.
Don't make me do this.
Pull the trigger. One more fraction of an inch. You had the gun. You appeared to have all the power. Yet I was in control. That is the strength of a god.
Back in the forest, the trio managed to find the Goa'uld ruins that housed the other Goa'uld shield machine, though Teal'c is not sure if it would still work after being abandoned for centuries. Back with O'Neill now, and at first Connor's rescue attempts seem to be working, but soon Hansen's men notice Connor and O'Neill, and both are recaptured and brought to Hansen. In the caves, Carter seemed to be stalling, but when Hansen threatens to execute O'Neill, she unwillingly activates the shield machine. Sometime later, and still believing that he only needs the one machine, Hansen brings the shield machine from the caves over to the location of the Stargate. The Stargate has also been laid down by the natives, and Hansen dials Earth without entering the iris code. As part of his performance in front of the natives, Hansen declares to them that he's sending the evil undoers back to the hell from whence they came. Luckily, before O'Neill and Connor are shoved into the Stargate, Jamala managed to get there in time to shoot at Hansen's men. Daniel is also there and attempts to prove to the natives that Hansen is not a god. To take back control of the situation, Hansen claims to be able to protect the natives and turn the sky orange. However, the machine does not work as intended, to the dismay of Hansen. While Hansen is distracted, O'Neill manages to get loose from his binding. Daniel reveals to the natives that there are in fact two devices, and Jamala shoots the staff in Teal'c's direction so that Teal'c knew when to activate the second machine. Luckily, the second machine still works, and the shield forms over everyone between the two machines, turning the sky orange. Realizing that he's at the end of his rope, Hansen attempts to drag Carter with him with the intention of committing suicide by jumping into the gate, but O'Neill manages to push Connor out of the way and tackle Hansen. Mad at his fake divinity, the natives rush over to Hansen and they toss him into the gate before anybody could send the iris code, killing Jonas. Sometime later, our characters are preparing to leave Avnor. Carter seems a bit down over her inability to shoot Hansen down when she had the chance. O'Neill gives her a great piece of advice.
Killing a man is no badge of honor, Captain. Look, I'm no expert on this thing, but I generally remember one commandment. I think it's the first.
I am the Lord your God, and you shall take no other gods before me.
Okay, it's not the first one. I'm talking about the no-killing one. No matter what the reason, every time you break it, you take one step closer to Hansen.
Overall, I believe it's a pretty tight episode. In my opinion, Cooper seemed to have understood the characters well to not write them terribly, and especially Carter. The First Commandment is a strong debut for Cooper, and looking at the list of episodes that he's written, it doesn't seem like he wrote any weak episodes. It's a 9 out of 10 from me. Oh boy, from one great episode to another. The cold open is very tight, as it shows SG-1 on a yellow desert planet. The characters find a big pit filled with broken blue crystals, and the establishing shot to show the pit is the worst use of CG in the show yet, which is not bad in my opinion. O'Neill goes off alone and is knocked unconscious by the lone unbroken blue crystal. A doppelganger, a fake O'Neill, faux Neil, stands over O'Neill's body and looks down at him. Since the recon mission is done and it doesn't seem like there are any other POIs near the gate, they return back to Earth with Faux Neil. And for an early series episode, the mystery behind Faux Neil is compelling as a cold open cliffhanger. During the debriefing, Daniel supposes that the crystal pit might have some sort of religious or ceremonial importance. Remember that during the Children of the Gods recap, I mentioned that this is Daniel's go-to first guess whenever they see some sort of alien ruins, and it's kind of funny how many times he mentions it throughout the series.
Some sort of ceremonial place. The gate it has to be an integral part of their spiritual culture.
During this scene, we see what we assume is O'Neill's memories that Faux Neil has somehow gotten access to. Faux Neil is oddly quiet and seemingly introspective. SG-1 is placed on stand down by Hammond until their next mission is decided, and this gives Carter enough freedom to research the crystals that they brought back from the planet. A nice detail that shows the SGC becoming more adept in handling their missions is Carter's mention that the crystals are currently in decon. This is obviously so that nothing similar to what happened in the Broca Divide happens again. It's nice. We follow Faux Neil for a lot of this episode, and by following him, we see that O'Neill keeps a little box of private belongings in his locker, which includes his old wedding ring and pictures of his son. This causes a specific memory of Charlie to trigger in Faux Neil. Now, seemingly determined with some sort of mission, Faux Neil heads out of the Cheyenne Mountain complex. We next see him standing outside O'Neill's old family home that he had when he was still with his wife and his son was still alive. He greets Sarah, now spelt without an H, in an eerie way, and the soundtrack in this scene is especially haunting.
I did.
Right, you did.
We, as a viewer, still don't know what Frontal wants, so the music says to keep us in suspense, as Frontal awkwardly communicates with Sarah. Harley Jane Kozak, who plays Sarah in this episode, does an amazing job in her role. She provides the perfect amount of vulnerability in her scenes with Frontal, as it is obviously opening some still fresh wounds from Charlie's accidental death. I won't go too deep into what is discussed during these more emotional scenes, as it's best watched firsthand, but RDA as Frontal, overcome by O'Neill's overwhelming feelings over the loss of Charlie, still tears me up to this day.
Charlie about ready?
Yeah, he was running around here a few minutes ago.
Notice how as soon as it cuts back to Frontal in Charlie's room, the background music stops using the menacing and eerie track from earlier and is now sad, warm, and emotional. That's right, there's no real antagonist in this episode. It's simply a character study episode, but with an alien crystal doppelganger instead of the character itself. The sinister music only returns when Frontal starts to electrify and collapse in pain. What's happening to it? To find that out, let's head back to the SGC and Carter's research into the blue crystal. We go back to the SGC and the crystals pass the decontamination protocols, though they do have a low-level EM field. When Carter studies a broken crystal, she recognizes that the crystal has been cut in a familiar way, and they rush to Teal'c to get him involved since they need his staff weapon. Oh yeah, in this episode, Teal'c doesn't get a good first impression of Earth because of what's shown on the TV they provided him with, and it leads to this funny interaction.
Teal'c, we need your help.
Your world is a strange place.
So's yours.
Listen, we need to stop by the armory and sign out your staff weapon.
Are we being deployed?
No, it's okay. Come on. Here's a good one.
What's going on in there? You received permission for me to fire my staff weapon in the gate room?
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
It's these great little interactions that allows the viewer to grow more and more fond of the main characters. I love these. They quickly find out that Goa'uld weapons are what destroy the crystals. Now, the question is why? While looking at the near-perfect blue crystal, Daniel realizes that a reflection of his face is forming in front of his very own eyes, and that freaks him out. When Carter looks closely at the crystal, a crystalline version of her face appears, and the crystal says, "Help us." At this moment, the gate activates, and a wormhole from P3X562 connects along with SG-1's iris code. Oh, it's only O'Neill. RDA's delivery of this line is hilarious.
What are you guys doing leaving without me?
After suffering through the physical exam and standard quarantine procedures like a prisoner, O'Neill is shown footage of Frontal arriving back at the SGC with the rest of SG-1. He is adamant that he's the real O'Neill. Carter suggests that Frontal could be a more powerful or evolved form of the blue crystal, since she and the others had just experienced the blue crystal mimicking them and talking to them. The blue crystal does respond to their questions, and they find out that the blue crystals are inhabited by some sort of life form made of energy. The reason why it asked for help earlier was because without P3X562's particular atmosphere, the energy life forms would grow weaker and disintegrate. That's why they have to return to their home planet. The reason why the energy life form didn't communicate earlier?
Why did you not speak before?
Fear.
Fear of what?
The Goa'uld came to our planet long ago. We were not afraid then, and we tried to greet them. One of them touched us as you did, and was destroyed by our energy.
The ghouls must have come through the gate exploring.
That's why it was afraid. We look just like them.
One of the ghouls was killed?
They gathered all the unity in one place, and ended it.
This reveal means that Daniel's theory that the pit was a ceremonial place is completely wrong, obviously. Daniel has a theory of what Frontal might be doing.
Any ideas? Any theories?
If you thought that your entire race was destroyed by the ghouls as punishment for harming one of them, What would you do if you thought it was going to happen again?
Sometime later, after some testing, Carter informs everyone that as the energy life forms are breaking down, it's actually releasing radiation. And though the crystals in the base are not big or strong enough to release enough radiation to be dangerous, something of Fo-Neel's size could definitely give a lethal and dangerous dose to those around it and cause a lot of damage. They realize that Fo-Neel must be near Sarah since it was looking at O'Neill's pictures of her. As they're preparing to leave the SGC, Carter theorizes that the energy life forms are breaking down because Earth's EM field is stronger than the one on P3X-562, and the difference is literally tearing the life forms apart. They find out that a J. O'Neill has been admitted to a local hospital near where Sarah lived, and so that's where they're heading. Though since the SGC and the Stargate are top secret, they can't do or say anything that would reveal the existences of either of them, and that means that Teal'c can't bring his beloved staff weapon, and he has to wear something to cover up his forehead tattoo, as it would raise too many questions. This is a funny line by Teal'c though, and it shows how much the TV has skewed his view of Earth.
Teal'c, you'll have to leave that here.
I have seen your world. I will need it.
They reach the hospital as Fo-Neel's breakdown starts getting worse and worse, and once again, Kozak does a stellar performance as Sarah when she sees O'Neill. They meet Fo-Neel and are even able to take off their radiation suit masks when an outburst seemed to lower the radiation levels to a more acceptable level. Instead of recapping this last few moments, I'll just edit the scene as I believe it's more effective this way.
You have come to destroy me. I know you weren't trying to kill me back on the planet. The Goulds. The people who destroyed your race. They're our enemies, too. I understand. Why did you come here? When my energy hurt you, I tried to heal you. But I did not understand your injury. So I looked into your mind. I saw the mind of a warrior. I tried to make you well before my mistake was discovered, before the others returned to destroy me. I understand now. Your deepest pain was not the physical injury I had caused. Your pain comes from an empty place in your heart where Charlie once was. I thought if I could bring Charlie to you, it would make you well. I did not understand. His death meant he could no longer exist as flesh and blood. Physical death does not have the same meaning to us. I could not bring Charlie to you. Charlie's gone. No, he's in here.
You cannot change what happened that day, just as I cannot change the day that the Gould destroyed my world. I am showing you what if Charlie is still there, inside you.
Fo-Neel is able to muster up enough energy to turn into Charlie. He tells O'Neill that he should forgive himself as Charlie still exists in his heart and memories. That's why the crystal being could even change into him. To provide Sarah with some sort of closure as well, Crystal Charlie asks to say goodbye to Sarah in Charlie's form, and Sarah tells O'Neill to look after himself afterwards. The episode ends with O'Neill returning back to P3X-562, chauffeuring Crystal Charlie. Though in terms of building the mythology of the whole series, the episode seems quite light compared to some of the previous ones. It's still a very engaging episode to watch. Called Lazarus is a beautiful character study of O'Neill. We get a deeper insight of the tragic accidental death of his son, and how the loss still affects him to the current day. And the beauty of having no actual antagonist for the episode allows for a lot more levity and quietness to explore the O'Neill character, as well as providing more comedic insights to the other characters too. I give it a 9 out of 10. If the name Hart Hansen sounds familiar, it should. since he created Bones, another show that I really like, though the way they handled the characters in the last couple of seasons I'm not too big of a fan of. At the very least, the mysteries were all interesting all throughout the series though. Let's get into the episode. This episode is the first proper push into the political subplot that had been mentioned every now and then throughout the previous episodes. We get a visitor at the SGC in this episode, the Secretary of Defense, David Swift, who informs the SGC of the dissatisfaction of the current administration with the progress of the Stargate program. The point of the program costing too much money to run without any benefits is brought up once more, as the cultural studies of the mentioned 19 separate worlds that they've done so far is considered not as valuable as the amount of usable technology that they've been able to bring back, being nothing right now. The Secretary of Defense compares the Stargate program with the moon landing and how humanity hadn't gone back to the moon in 25 years, and brings up the hypothetical question.
If one of those Gould ships were coming here right now, have you brought back one thing we can fight them off with?
This is a funny hypothetical because it gets reverse Uno carded later on in the season. We'll get more into it when we get there. Prompted by the hypothetical, Teal'c volunteers a gate address, a planet that seemingly has a creature that possesses the power of invisibility. If they could capture the creature technology that even the Goa'uld are still searching for themselves could possibly be developed from studying the creature. Eager for this possibility, SG-1 travels to the planet. However, soon after they arrive, the Stargate and the rest of the team's hunting gear with the Malp disappear before the opening credits play. It's a pretty interesting cold open, and this episode is a pretty important episode in terms of world building. However, I seem to remember it a little bit sourly before my rewatch for this video. For some reason, I remembered it as a pretty boring episode, although that was quickly rectified when I finally rewatched the episode and wrote the notes. Coming back after the opening credits, SG-1 continues on their mission anyway, since they still had a few stun guns to hunt the creature with. The team split into two teams of two, and O'Neill and Daniel soon find a creature. The creature's called the Fenry. I'll start calling them that from now on, because it's better than just calling it the creature. We get one full look at the Fenry sans invisibility later, but for most of the episode, all we get as the viewer is a bit of a shimmering effect, and the loud flapping of its wings, like a giant insectoid. As O'Neill is about to take a shot at the Fenry, a staff blast scares the flying creature away. At first, O'Neill is annoyed at Teal'c, but Teal'c informs him that there must be a Goa'uld hunting party on the planet right now with them. This raises the stakes as it's soon revealed that the Goa'uld hunting party is led by Apophis himself. SG-1 has a quick timeout meeting, and considering they hadn't been able to find a whiff of Apophis in the 19 different missions, and not including the unknown number of missions other SG teams have also been on, they decide to try and ambush Apophis and his Serpent Guards in a desperate bid to capture and interrogate him to find out about Shara and Skara, and possibly gain an insight to Goa'uld technology. The ambush ultimately fails when it turns out that Apophis has a personal force field that he controls with his hand device that prevents him from being knocked out. Take note of the fact that the staff weapon is able to phase through the force field as it deflects O'Neill's bullets. Apophis quickly kills O'Neill, Carter, and Daniel, and oh no, they're dead! But not for long! Only Teal'c remains standing in the end, that they also managed to kill one of Apophis's Serpent Guards, Shackle, and just as Apophis is about to execute Teal'c and all of the dead bodies disappear without a trace. At another location, like some sort of tent, Daniel, Carter, and O'Neill awaken. All wounds heal, and weapons taken away. Odd-looking humanoid aliens approach them. The wiki describes them as peaceful and fairy-like, and I have to say that their headpieces are pretty cool. These are the Nox. Say hello to them.
Hi, Nox.
The Nox are silent, but they lead SG-1 out of the tent to a campsite and proceeds to offer them food in the form of fruits. As they eat the fruits and discuss asking for their weapons back, we see that the group of Nox at this camp consists of 2 adult males, 1 adult female, and 1 male child. Teal'c approaches the camp, and the rest of SG-1 are glad he's okay. The child Nox approaches Carter and introduces himself as Nefreyu. He's a little bit of a little shit, but it's for the purpose of the message of this episode and season 1 in general. I'll explain later. Funny O'Neill line alert.
No, you can't keep him.
Sometime later, the group has moved towards the campfire and are seemingly eating a proper meal when Antaeus, one of the male adults, speaks to them in English, advising them that he will return them to the Stargate, and the reason why the Nox had been silent all this time was because it took time for them to learn the language. This shows the Nox's heightened intellect. And Teus also reveals to them that their weapons are gone. The female Nox, Llama, also speaks up and reveals that the Nox had watched the ambush. Funny moment between O'Neill and Daniel here.
He's just bad. He's very bad.
Teal'c reveals that the force field technology Apophis had is brand new to him. And in my notes, I mentioned that I read somewhere, I can't remember where now, but there was a mandate for SG-1 that was to differentiate the show from others like Star Trek. They wanted the humans to constantly be on the back foot as new complications, technologies, and threats continue to come up as humanity gets stronger and stronger throughout the series. This also gives the universe in the show a nice sense of constantly evolving and allows a continuous sense of danger to loom over our protagonists, even as they get stronger and stronger and access to new technologies and weapons to fight against the enemies. Back to the episode though. Since the Nox saved SG-1's lives, they feel indebted to them and feel like the Nox has inserted themselves in between the struggle between humanity and the Goa'uld. Since they seem primitive from the way their clothing looks and the look of the camp, SG-1 feels that they can't just leave the Nox while Apophis is still out there being dangerous somewhere on their planet. And Teus seems kinda standoffish, though he does reveal that there are other Nox, though the others, and I quote, have no wish to meet SG-1. Llama informs that their brother won't revive till later, and we find out that Shackle, Apophis's new first prime, is SG-1's brother. Uh-oh. The misunderstanding comes from the fact that Teal'c is allied with SG-1 and Teal'c is like Shackle. It's kind of funny seeing the Nox's seemingly naive belief that SG-1 can convince Shackle to turn against Apophis like they did to Teal'c. Another misunderstanding develops from Antaeus' slightly cryptic answers and sour attitude towards SG-1 as SG-1 attempts to impress upon the Nox the danger of Shackle and Apophis once Shackle has arrived. Later, Teal'c attempts to recruit Shackle, but as expected, it fails. While this is happening, the rest of SG-1 are creating bows and arrows to defend themselves if they encounter Apophis again. Nefreyu follows O'Neill and questions him on why O'Neill fights if he also believes in peace. They have to separate when a decloaked Fenrir seem to attack O'Neill and Nefreyu. We cut to Opa, the other male adult Nox, and Daniel as the latter tries to create some sort of friendship between humanity and the Nox. Opa seems to be more open and friendly to SG-1, especially compared to Antaeus, and Opa drops some wise words on that Daniel.
Or you must have some knowledge that we don't have. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we could learn a lot from you. I really wish that we could be friends with the Nox.
Yes, you have much to learn.
Well, why don't you teach me now?
Knowledge takes time. And over the years, we teach the young to be wise. How old am I? How do you mark time?
A day is one revolution of our planet. A year is one revolution around our sun. There are 365 days in 1 year, so...
Then I am 432 years old.
Well, you look great.
Thank you.
Opa reveals that the Goa'uld have been hunting the Fenrir for as long as he could remember, and that the only reason they haven't buried the Stargate yet was because then the Goa'uld would know somebody was on the planet all along. Back with O'Neill though, Antaeus appears in front of O'Neill and reveals that the Nox have the ability to go invisible, and not the Fenrir. And O'Neill works out that the Nox are the ones who made the Stargate and Malp disappear. O'Neill regroups with the others at the Nox camp and reveal to them the truth about the Fenrir. They realize that if Apophis were to find out the truth about the invisibility technology, then he'll hunt down the Nox, even bombarding the planet to ruin if he can't get his hands on it. They realize that they have to take Shackle with them to keep the Nox safe, but Antaeus turns off his invisibility cheats and tells them that they will only allow them to take Shackle if the Jafar wants to go with them. Teal'c returns to Shackle to try to recruit him once more, only to get stabbed by Shackle by this Assassin's Creed Valhalla-ass, Eivor Varinsdottir-ass blade. Unfortunately, Llama was also there, and she too is stabbed by Shackle, and Shackle runs away, but not too far away. The Nox are seen by SG-1 and Shackle appearing and disappearing as they perform their healing ritual, their ritual of life, and Llama becomes conscious again. Shackle then fully runs off to find Apophis with his newfound knowledge. SG-1 deduces that the fact that the Nox become visible when they perform the ritual of life is a weakness. As the whole situation with Shackle and Apophis has now become worse, SG-1 hunts Shackle in the hopes of capturing him before he reaches Apophis. Nefreyu, the little shit, wants to see a Goa'uld out of curiosity. O'Neill tells him to go back to the camp and Nefreyu disappears. Unfortunately though, soon after, Shackle manages to regroup with Apophis, forcing SG-1 to return to the Nox camp to warn them of the impending danger. At this point, Oppo informs Antaeus that Nefreyu has disappeared. Oh, Nefreyu has straight up walked up to Apophis and introduced himself, and Apophis kills the little shit with his hand device. Cut to Antaeus and SG-1 as they're searching for Nefreyu, and Antaeus delivers this line.
The very young do not always do what they are told.
Spoilers, this is the main motif for SG-1 Season 1, by the way. They find Nefreyu's collapsed body and bring him back to the Nox camp, SG-1 recognizing that it's obviously a trap. Nevertheless, Antaeus is adamant that they perform the ritual of life as soon as possible, and due to his stubbornness, O'Neill uncharacteristically abandons the Nox. It's uncharacteristic because it is in fact SG-1's counter to Apophis's trap. As they're preparing to ambush Apophis's ambush, O'Neill recalls to the others of the staff weapon being passed to Apophis by a Serpent Guard when his force field was active, and he theorizes that the shield only stops high-velocity objects like bullets and staff blasts, but an arrow or dart would be slow enough to pass the force field. I told y'all to keep note of that moment. The ambush this time goes much smoother, as the Goa'uld's guards are down, and just as O'Neill was about to shoot an arrow with the stun needle attached, Apophis disappears, a la Nox technology, since they managed to finish the ritual of life on Nefreyu in time. O'Neill isn't too particularly happy about that. We transition back to the plateau where the Stargate was located, and Antaeus reveals himself, informing them they'd already sent the Goa'uld forcefully through the gate, and that to prevent the Goa'uld from returning, they will bury the gate after sending SG-1 back to Earth. Nefreyu appears next to Antaeus to say goodbye to SG-1, and he also tells the team that their weapons were sent back to the gate to Earth also. To ease their fears of a possible future Goa'uld invasion, Antaeus reveals that though they seem primitive in their clothing and tendency to live in symbiosis with nature, they are actually technological enough to have massive floating cities that they are able to cloak as well. The Stargate appears behind them and is dialed instantaneously, and without the usage of the DHD. Teal'c summarizes the whole situation the best.
It appears they possess a form of technology far greater than that of the Goa'uld.
And realizing that they have ultimately failed in bringing back anything of value to Earth, Daniel is regretful. And the episode ends with the iconic quote.
The very young do not always do as they're told.
Now, the political subplot that kickstarted the mission is not concluded on screen, but we can safely assume that though the Nox have now buried the gate, their mere existence means that through sheer means of probability, there must be another race or culture that are either technologically equal or superior to the Goa'uld, and that the Stargate program should continue for that possibility. The whole state of limbo that the Stargate program is in continues to simmer throughout the rest of the series, and this season in particular, and we'll get to see it flare up a few more times before the end of the season. This episode is a solid 8 out of 10 for me. Alright, let's change things up by giving you my rating of the episode first. Brief Candle is not a terrible episode. I've given it a 7 out of 10 for an episode, and it all solely rests on RDA's acting skills and some Goa'uld world building. But let me explain. We start the episode on the planet just before SG-1 arrives. The planet is called Argos, and a man named Alekos is praying to the deity of the planet, Pelops. Pelops is a Goa'uld that is mentioned a couple of times throughout the season, though this is the closest we ever get to see of his dominion. Fun fact, according to the Stargate SG-1 role-playing game rulebook, Living Gods, Stargate System Lords, Pelops created the Jafar. I read that from the wiki since I'm not able to get my hands on the extended media, and it's considered canon by the wiki, so... Anyway, Alekos' wife, Thetis, is pregnant, and since he has no idea what to do to help her, he's praying to Pelops. SG-1 arrive and have to help Thetis give birth. This is a pretty weak cold open in my opinion, as before the opening credits, Daniel acts as if he's never been a midwife before, only for us to cut back to the situation after the credits, and he is helping Thetis. And it just makes the whole rising tension but before the opening credits seem extremely forced. They do mention that Thetis' baby is only the second he's helped deliver, but the cold open played it as if he's not knowledgeable at all.
What? But don't look at me, I don't know what to do.
Push. Push. Push.
Thetis has quickly recovered and is already walking around, the first sign that something is up with the Argosians. We get a clear shot of the baby's birthmark, and due to his help, the new parents named their son Danel. Boy, this show loves their apostrophes. Alekos introduces the Argosians as the Chosen, or will be explained later.
I'll explain later.
The Argosians celebrate Danel's birth, and SG-1 is invited to the proceedings. While celebrating, a beautiful Argosian by the name of Cynthia soon approaches O'Neill with some food that she insists is only for O'Neill. The other members of SG-1 tease O'Neill about Cynthia's flirting.
He's only for you.
I think you have a fan, Colonel.
I believe this woman wishes to spend time with O'Neill.
Something must be in the food because O'Neill is suddenly affected by it, laughing uncontrollably at Teal'c's remark.
Perhaps it was a good go-out.
It's funny because the good go-old concept will be explored in the next season of the series, but we'll get there when we get there. O'Neill is grabbed by the Argosians and Cynthia dances in front of him. The music sounds tribal, and, well, we find out later that this whole thing with the cake and the dance is a marriage ritual. How progressive. Cynthia brings O'Neill inside as Alekos approaches the rest of SG-1 and says this.
Unto every man the Creator gives 100 blissful days. It is a sin not to celebrate each and every one.
Later, after consummating his marriage with Cynthia, unknowingly, O'Neill seemingly snaps out of whatever was affecting him and is embarrassed when the Argosians enter the communal space they're currently in. They all fall asleep extremely quickly, and SG-1 walk in on a slightly underdressed O'Neill. They reveal that the celebrations ended abruptly just as the sun set. At first, they wonder if it was some sort of sickness, but the Argosians seem to only be in a deep state of sleep, and no natural sickness affects everyone the same way at the same time. Then they realize that O'Neill was the only one that ingested the food that might have been laced with something, and O'Neill assumes that Cynthia drugged him. Unfortunately, he soon collapses and falls asleep like the Argosians.
From now on, we stick to rations.
The next day, O'Neill awakes with a hangover as SG-1 has been conducting interviews with the Argosians.
They all act as if what happened last night was normal. They party until sundown, then they fall asleep, and they wake when the sun rises.
I'd like an explanation.
Back at the temple, Alekos helps in whatever way he can, though he cannot do much, as the Argosians only have a limited amount of knowledge bestowed upon them by Pelops. He reveals their creation story. Pelops shows the people, hence the title, created a garden in Argos, and allowed the Chosen to live their lives without any interference. Teal'c then reveals that the glyphs at the bottom of the Pelops statue is an obscure dialect of Goa'uld, and he's only revealing it to Daniel now and not earlier because nobody asked him earlier. It's just a comical moment.
Writings. Do you know what this is?
It is of Pelops.
It is Goa'uld, an obscure dialect.
Why didn't you tell me that before?
You never before inquired.
Teal'c puts in a sequence based on the Goa'uld glyphs, and from a secret compartment, a compact Goa'uld record is found. We'll soon find out that these are Pelops' experiment notes. We cut to Carter approaching Thetis with the hopes of giving Danel, who was born the day prior, remember, a shell for a toy or something. And lo and behold, the 1-year-old that Thetis is holding is Danel, complete with the same birthmark and all. Thetis then reveals to O'Neill and Carter that Argosians live for a total of 100 days. Remember that quote that Alekos said earlier? And we, the audience, now realize the misunderstanding that Daniel had at that quote. Carter visits Daniel and Teal'c at the temple sometime later, and Daniel relays what he and Teal'c had managed to translate from Pelops' records so far.
From what we've been able to translate so far, he wanted to know how humans evolve. So he shortened the lifespan to about 1/250th of normal.
Pelops wanted to determine what the human host body would become in the future, and perhaps accelerate the process.
The stakes are raised for O'Neill now, and if Daniel is right that it's some kind of virus, then it's easier to leave O'Neill at Argos to avoid a similar outbreak situation like the one in Broca Divide. Another sunset, another day, and unfortunately, O'Neill collapses like the rest of the Argosians. But before he falls asleep, he orders Carter to go back to Earth to see if they can find out more about what's happening on Argos. Yay! Janet's here for this episode. On Earth, Janet shows Carter what she found when she did a protein analysis on the Argosian blood sample and O'Neill's blood sample. There is some sort of particulate in both their blood samples. However, O'Neill's sample had a lot more particulates than the Argosian one. Sometime later, Carter comes back to Argos and O'Neill is visibly older. The makeup department did a great job in creating the old Neil looks as the episode progresses and more days pass on Argos. And RDA's acting really carries the episode. Not only does his manner of speaking slows and changes, but the way he stands, the way he carries himself in the scenes, it's just all stellar. Carter informs Old Neil of the organism particulates in his blood, and Old Neil unfortunately gets a deadline to raise the stakes even higher. In under 2 weeks, if they don't figure out how to deal with the organism, Old Neil will age to around 100 years old if he doesn't die from old age earlier. Not wanting to risk the team any more than necessary, Old Neil orders the rest of SG-1 to return to Earth to study what's affecting the Argosians and hopefully find a cure. Let's focus on the Earth timeline for now. Upon further study of the samples, Carter realizes that the particulates were not from a natural organism, but in fact are machines. This is the first appearance of nanotechnology in the series, spoilers, and it's what's responsible for shortening the Argosians' life cycle. From this point on, they're called nanocytes by the characters. Later, they give the nanocytes some live tissue to react to, but the nanocytes don't touch them. Instead, they consume everything in order to replicate themselves. That's their base function when they're not aging humans. But why didn't they age the live tissue? Janet postulates that there's something on Argos that's causing them to do other functions. Multiple days pass and Older Neil, has separated himself from the Argosians and set up shop at the temple. He is obviously and rightfully bitter at Pelops for what he's done, and Cynthia catches him talking to the statue. She wants to spend more time with Older Neil and reveals that the cake that was only for O'Neill was a marriage cake. Older Neil accidentally reveals that Pelops was not some benevolent god and breaks down Cynthia's and the Argosians' belief system. He reveals that he's actually thousands and thousands of days old, and Cynthia finds that hard to believe and leaves with tears in her eyes.
You do not tell the truth. It is not possible.
Pelops was an alien who used your people. He shortened your lives to satisfy his curiosity.
Later, Older Neil is visibly older and he seems to be writing a will of some sort, but we see that it's a pretty empty piece of paper with only Dear Sarah written on it. Even after the events of Cold Lazarus, he's still struggling to figure out his thoughts about his ex-wife and presumably their dead son. Alekos questions on the validity of Older Neil's elongated life claims. Alekos is visibly questioning his whole faith system. To distract him from his spiritual breakdown, Older Neil asks Alekos what he would do if he could live longer than 100 days. Alekos speaks of his dream to be an explorer, though the teachings speak of Pelops striking the chosen down if they were to defy his laws, like leaving the designated living areas. Older Neil encourages him even more. An unspecified amount of time later, oldest Neil is more visibly feeble and old. Cynthia approaches him as he sits in front of the Argosian gate. She claims he's wasting his life, while he explains that he's reflecting on his life and trying to figure out how to get the rest of it back. He speaks of Sarah, and upon recognizing that he still cares for his ex-wife, Cynthia feels guilt of taking away his ability to see her ever again. She vows to give what she has taken away and kisses oldest Neil. Because of the containment breach with the nanocytes in an earlier scene on Earth, Hammond is forced to order for the blood and tissue samples with the nanocytes to be destroyed and prohibit travel to Argos for the next while, pretty much abandoning oldest Neil to his fate. Later, as the Argosians are laying down sacrifices at the foot of the Pelops statue, oldest Neil questions why, and is angered by their remaining reverence to the god. He reveals that Pelops' race sees humanity as slaves, and starting with Alekos, the Argosians decide to rebel against their deity. The Argosians decide to tear down the statue of Pelops and are successful in doing so. At first, they're fearful, as their teachings say that those who defy Pelops will be struck down, but When nothing happens, they celebrate. We then see Cynthia and Aldous Neal walk along the beach. The scene cuts to even later, and it is visibly nighttime. And Aldous Neal realizes that they should have fallen asleep as soon as the sun set. He works out that there must be some sort of transmitter of sorts in the living areas that control the nanocytes. It is now the next day, and when they get back to the living areas, they see that the other Argosians are still asleep. Something's gone wrong with the transmitter. They quickly find the transmitter in the statue of Pelops that they toppled over, and Aldous Neal dials the gate to tell Earth of his discovery. SG-1 returns to Argos in this awesome shot, and Aldous Neal delivers a banger of a line.
Welcome back, kids. It's damn good to see you again. Don't worry. Aside from a little prostate problem we won't go into, it's not so bad.
They explain to Aldous Neal that among Pelops' notes, there were 2 sets of glyphs that were a bit difficult to translate until they realized that they were numbers and not words. Those numbers were for 2 different frequencies. One to put the Argosians to sleep and activate the nanocytes' aging function, and the other to wake the Argosians up and putting the nanocytes on standby. Carter uses the equipment they brought from Earth to hopefully produce the latter frequency. Luckily, since there's only about 3 minutes left to the episode, the frequency works and the Argosians soon wake up, though they are confused as to why they're woken up so late. Later, as the sun is setting, SG-1 tells Cynthia that she and the Argosians should start aging normally now that the nanocytes have been permanently deactivated and their immune systems started purging their bodies of the machines. Aldous Neal resigns himself of being as old and looking as old as his own grandfather, but in a little bit of a Deus Ex Machina, Carter reveals that the whole aging process was never designed to be done on someone who is already older than what the nanocytes were capable of, so all the visible changes that were just surface level designed to simulate aging. Once Aldous Neal's body purges the nanocytes, he'll turn to normal. The episode ends with Aldous Neal thanking Cynthia for spending time with him. He's learned to treasure every day because of her and promises that the Argosians will get visits from Earth to see how they're going. In today's age where TV shows usually attempt to raise questions and mysteries and save the answers to those mysteries until, at the very least, the end of the season, it's wild to see Stargate SG-1 do the complete opposite. Brief Candle ended up being quite filled with world building, with not only revealing the existence of nanotechnology in the show's universe, but also revealing the Goa'ul's propensity to conduct experiments on their human subjects. Brief Candle also poses the question of whether or not other mythical legendary beings from different cultures on Earth were also aliens who visited Earth. The existence of Pelops, who Daniel described as a hero in Greek culture, as opposed to the rest of the Goa'ulds we've seen so far being Ra and Apophis cosplaying as gods of Egyptian culture, it raises a question in Daniel's mind that kickstarts the episode's events. The episode begins with a briefing in the conference room, and I'll let Daniel explain his thesis.
If you study myths worldwide, it looks as if there were 2 different kinds of star gods. The tyrants, who treated their subjects like cattle, demanded absolute obedience, utilized their technology to punish and control.
As in the Goa'uld.
And the culture bearers, who used knowledge and technology to benefit humans.
So you're saying that the ghouls weren't the only aliens to visit Earth in the past. Well, how does that affect us today?
We don't think the Goa'uld built the Stargate system.
Oh yeah, that's right. Daniel casually drops the fact that at this point in time, the running theory in the SGC is that the Goa'uld did not build the Stargate system. They just piggybacked on the technology. Absolutely massive. Daniel introduces the characters to his theory that the Nordic gods might be an alien race, and Teal'c reveals that he has actually seen the symbol of Thor's hammer before.
I have seen the hammer sign before. It is the symbol of a world called Sumeria. Al-Jafar taught the sequence of Stargate symbols to that world to ensure that no Goa'uld goes there. It is forbidden.
His explanation of Cymeria piques the interest of Hammond and the rest of SG-1, and a mission is quickly greenlit to explore Cymeria. Before they depart, Hammond gives SG-1 a box filled with information about Earth's cultures, religions, and histories, sort of like a dating profile bio for Earth to give to any friendly aliens they might meet along their missions. Oh, and let's ignore how close the Malp and Daniel is in this shot because of the Stargate's kawoosh. It's listed as a goof on the wiki and gateworld.net, and I've ignored a lot of the goofs so far, as every episode of every TV show has them, it's just inevitable. Although if I feel like the goofs are quite noticeable like this one, or if they're funny, like the main cast breaking character in the shot, then I'll point them out. They travel to Cimmeria, and things quickly go wrong when the huge monolith that kind of looks like a hammer near the gate starts to hum while the Cimmerians chant Thor's name. The scanning light emerges from the hammer and scans the bodies of SG-1 before stopping by Teal'c and focusing on his abdomen. He is visibly in pain and can't move, and O'Neill attempts to tackle him out of the light, only for both of them to disappear. It's a very effective cold open, and provides a nice reason for the characters to separate. The two storylines don't reconvene till the very end of the episode, so let's go through O'Neill's and Teal'c's storyline first and discover the important world building points there first. O'Neill and Teal'c wake up in a dark cave. Teal'c explains that the beam from the monolith caused both he and the Goa'uld parasite in his pouch a lot of pain. A vision of the stereotypical depiction of Thor appears near them and informs them of their predicament. They're currently in a prison, a labyrinth, designed to capture Goa'uld. Thor mentions important series talking points, like the Asgard fleet, the High Council of Asgard, and their sour relationship with the Goa'uld System Lords. This is actually the first time the series gives the fans an official group title for the Goa'ulds. O'Neill quickly works out that the image of Thor in front of them is just a recording when Thor seemingly ignores him every now and then.
Came here to see you.
This is your prison. Your technology will not function here. There are no luxuries, no worshippers, no slaves to do your
Teal'c, I think we just got the answering machine.
Thor does reveal that wherever they are, Goa'uld technology would not work, so the Asgards are superior in terms of technological advancements. But he didn't say if the human weapons are disabled though. Thor's message ends with the revelation that only the host can escape the prison alive. Uh-oh. Teal'c immediately suggests O'Neill to leave without him, but O'Neill refuses to. They decide to go to the Hall of Mjolnir before deciding what to do next, like the recording of Thor said to. Whilst travelling, Teal'c tells O'Neill that he shouldn't have tried to save Teal'c, as that act caused him to be trapped with Teal'c in the prison. We see O'Neill's trust and care for Teal'c as he quickly brushes it off.
Of course, you're not going to find me walking around with one of those Goa'uld larvae in my gut, but hey.
This is a funny comment by O'Neill, foreshadowing a situation in a future episode. I'll explain it later when we get to it.
I'll explain later.
Later, the two find bones and dead Goa'uld parasites. They seem to have died with the hosts, and Teal'c informs O'Neill that something had killed the hosts and the Goa'uld and then eaten the hosts' bodies. Later, in a section of the labyrinth with lamps, Teal'c and O'Neill test their respective weapons, and luckily, the human weapons work. O'Neill gives Teal'c a pistol, so he's not totally unarmed. O'Neill has to rest a little, and Teal'c and O'Neill discuss using Thor's hammer to free Skara and Sha'Rei from their Goa'ulds. It's a nice reminder of the emotional calls to action for O'Neill and Daniel, and it also gives the viewers a little bit of hope for the characters. This is when we see a monster that's been threatening all over the place move and cause a loud splash somewhere in the prison that alerts O'Neill and Teal'c. Later, they finally meet each other, and the monster reveals itself as an Unas. Note that the Unas seems to be taller than Christopher Judge. Judge is 1.91 meters tall, 6'2" for the Americans. He's not a short king, and we get to see a long shot to show the full height of the Unas. So the imposing nature of the Unas is quickly established not just in strength by how easily the Unas swatted Teal'c away, but by his height as well. Oh, and talking about the Unas, James Earl Jones provides the voice work for the Unas in this episode. Mother-flipping Mufasa voices the Unas. O'Neill quickly takes care of the Unas, and Teal'c declares,
"The first one. He's dead."
But not for long.
The two leave, but the camera tracks into a close-up shot of the Unas' face, and we see its eyes glow. Oh look, his parasite is working overtime. Sometime later, Teal'c reveals that the Unas is believed to have been the first host of the Goa'uld.
Unas is believed to have been the first host, born of the same primordial waters as the Goa'uld. It became a myth, much like your vampire.
That thing was a Goa'uld?
Yes.
I thought they preferred human hosts.
There are other species far older that have been used as hosts. Some of immeasurable power and savagery.
It is dead, right? We don't have to go back there and drive a stake through its chest or anything.
The old stories say Unas had great regenerative powers. But those are tales told to frighten children. It is a myth. It was dead.
That's good.
I believe.
You believe?
The last time Teal'c seems this apprehensive and unsure about something was during the prison break sequence in Children of the Gods. So the discovery of the existence of the Unus gives the same amount of culture shock and awe to Teal'c as defying the god he had been indoctrinated into serving. The Unus soon regains consciousness and has a little tanty roar. Teal'c and O'Neill hear the roar easily. The tension rises. Luckily though, they seem to find the Hall of Mjolnir soon after. O'Neill steps through the doorway in the shape of a hammer and scouts ahead, noting that it leads to the outside. However, when Teal'c attempts to walk through, Thor's hammer activates and Teal'c screams in extreme pain. O'Neill pushes him back into the hall and out of the hammer, and Teal'c thanks him. At this point, the Unus finally approaches the hall, and O'Neill decides to stand with Teal'c to fight the Unus, even though he only has one more mag left for his assault rifle. And this great moment between Teal'c and O'Neill happened.
Are you considering the same tactic as I?
Teal'c, the cliche is, are you thinking what I'm thinking? The answer is yes.
The two parties fight, and they barely manage to push the Unus into the hammer, which kills the Goa'uld inside it. Due to not having the healing factor from the Goa'uld parasite, the Unus finally succumbs to its multiple gunshot wounds. Oh, and Daniel, Carter, and this random chick called Kendra is also here in this scene. But what have they been up to? Let's quickly go over the important world-building moments in Carter's and Daniel's storyline. Soon after Teal'c and O'Neill disappeared at the start of the episode, a character named Gair Wynn, the wife of the leader of the local village, greets them. There's a bit of an ironic moment when she remarks that they're kinda short for gods, and when you see the true forms of Thor and other Asgardians, they are extremely short, but that's a little bit of a spoiler. Gair Wynn reveals that Thor brought the humans to Cimmeria from Earth, or Midgard, and made Thor's hammer to keep them safe. They've been able to flourish and live in peace in Cimmeria. Gair Wynn also mentions that one day Thor will return to Cimmeria to teach them of the Asgardian technology once they are older.
It's said that Thor will come back one day and teach us when we're older.
Note the use of the age language here, as the Nox also described SG-1 as very young in the episode they appeared in. The very next episode, after this episode, will further explain the similarities. Gair Wynn mentions someone who might know what happened to Teal'c and O'Neill, called Kendra. She used to be a host who arrived 10 seasons prior, who was taken by Thor's hammer and found later by hunters in the mountains. Carter believes that Kendra was transported by the beam to somewhere else, and Gair Wynn then leads Carter and Daniel to Kendra. Kendra lives in isolation by her own choice, and we see her using some Goa'uld technology to help heal a boy's broken wrist. This is the first mention of non-hosts being able to use Goa'uld technology, and that is a very important plot point and detail that will repeatedly appear over the series. She reveals the entry scar left by her Goa'uld parasite, and she reveals to them that Thor's hammer removes the parasite from the host body, freeing the host without killing them. This gives Daniel hope for Shah-Ra. They try to get Kendra to help them get to the prison exit, explaining that Teal'c is Jafar, and Kendra is kinda racist against the Jafar, but after some mystical talk into some weather, Kendra finally agrees to lead them to the prison exit. And that's basically it for Kendra, Daniel, and Carter's journey. We get glimpses of it every now and then, but nothing else of great importance happens in their story after this point. Just some character drama between Carter and Daniel because they get lost a little bit. So let's go back to the Hall of Mjolnir near the end of the episode, now that SG-1 is all together and Kendra is also there. With the Unus defeated, O'Neill explains to Daniel that to let Teal'c leave, they have to destroy Thor's hammer, removing the hope of turning Shah-Ra and Skara back to normal. It's heartbreaking that Daniel seemingly has to be the one to destroy the Asgardian technology, but it shows how much he cares and trusts Teal'c, and it's a sacrifice Teal'c will not forget.
Thank you, Daniel Jackson.
Before they leave Cimmeria, SG-1 suggests that the natives seal up the cave so that when Goa'uld are transported to the labyrinth, at least they'll be trapped without technology, and the Cimmerians will still be safe. Though they don't believe many Goa'uld would even dare to visit the planet since it's already got a scary reputation. Kendra thanks them for helping her face her greatest fears. working through her PTSD, and Daniel hands her the Sagan Institute box from the start of the episode, asking Kendra to give it to the Asgard when Thor comes back to visit. Rewatching this season, I was reminded again and again of how early some of the core mythology of the show was actually introduced in season 1. Every show's first season is packed with foundational world building to introduce the audience to the show's universe, but in my personal opinion, SG-1 goes above and beyond what's expected in that regards. Well, that's just my justification for how long this script for this season has gotten. There's just so much to talk about. Anyway, this was a fun episode that introduced some exciting concepts. Exciting and quite well written. I give it an 8 out of 10. Alrighty. Torment of Tantalus is the second outing of Robert C. Cooper, and it's truly a game changer. Tantalus is also the first of 2 episodes that big co-boss Jonathan Glassner ever directed, so that's also very exciting. So let's jump right in. The episode opens with Daniel watching an old recording of a group of people attempting to dial the Stargate. The recording was part of the information transferred from the Pentagon to the SGC of experiments the government did on the Stargate in 1945 that they only just declassified. O'Neill comes up to the conference room to remind Daniel of a physical exam that SG-1 had scheduled and waits for Daniel to finish watching the current tape he's on. Daniel mentions that the notes mysteriously and abruptly end with no conclusion, and the two are shocked when the tape reveals that the 1945 experiments ended with the scientists succeeding in powering up the Stargate and sending someone through to an unknown destination. The tape ends with the gate disconnecting and the poor soul stranded on the other side. What a tantalizing cold open to an absolute banger episode. It's okay, Joel, that was an amazing play on words, and it's not your fault that if nobody notices that. You can only do so much yourself. It's not your fault that if people don't understand how brilliant you are. Oh yay! Return of Catherine. Daniel visits Catherine to talk to her about the 1945 experiments. Catherine mentions that it's been 6 months since the events of Children of the Gods, and how nobody reached out to her about going back into the Stargate program. When Daniel broaches the topic, Catherine reveals that her father headed up the research team experimenting on the gate. Because of the high tension after the Great War, they believe that the Stargate was a weapon of some sort, or at the very least could be used as one. Catherine was not part of the military-led research team because of sexism in the military. I mean, women's right to vote was only made part of the Constitution 20-odd years prior. What more do women want? Am I right? For my sanity's sake, I feel like I have to mention that my previous questions were for joking matters and does not reflect my true beliefs, just in case anyone doesn't get it. Anyway, in the episode we get Catherine flashbacks, where we meet her fiance, a Dr. Ernest Littlefield, played by Paul McGillian, who will appear in Stargate Atlantis as Dr. Carson Beckett. More on Beckett when we get to Atlantis. The dynamic between young Ernest and young Catherine, played by Nancy Hillis, is interesting as they visibly care for each other, but because of the time period and Catherine's father's old-fashioned sensibilities, it's obvious that Ernest recognizes Catherine's brilliance and somewhat respects her inputs.
Are you using alternating or direct current to charge it?
Alternating, I think. Why?
Try using direct. It might prevent the charge from bouncing back to the generator. And you should talk to my father.
I will, I promise.
The flashbacks are mostly here to flesh out Catherine's and Ernest's characters a little bit more, although they do show that chronologically, Ernest was the first person to figure out that the 39 symbols on the Stargate combined to an address, and as shown in the cold open, against all odds, without computers and without accounting for stellar drift, was able to connect the gate to a unique address. What's tragic is that Catherine reveals that her father, thinking that he was protecting her, hid the truth about Ernest's situation, saying that a workplace accident took her fiance's life. Catherine feels betrayed that Ernest made the decision to go through the gate without asking her opinion, and rightfully feels abandoned. Daniel was able to figure out the gate address from the footage of the 1945 experiments, and knowing that he shouldn't be showing her any of this, he still tells her that they're able to go through the gate on a mission to find out what happened to Ernest. Doesn't this whole thing remind you of Antaeus' comment in The Nox, "The very young do not always do what they are told"? We cut to the SGC, and Hammond, being a long-running military man, is rightfully angry by Daniel's actions. But since Daniel's not part of the military, he's not applicable for a court-martial, and SG-1's utilization of Daniel's civilian status to avoid court-martial recurs multiple times over the series. In fact, this isn't the only time this appears in this season. Daniel makes his case for SG-1 to go on a mission to the address Ernest went to, explaining that there is still a chance that Ernest is still alive, and Carter enters the conference room and explains that the address Ernest found is not included in the Giza cartouche, which means it's an address the Goa'uld had not yet charted themselves. Whatever is on the other side of the address would be proof that the Goa'uld did not create the Stargate system, which was a theory only introduced last episode. Once again, this could have been a plot point they reveal over several episodes by trickling the information, but no. They introduce these plot points and straight up answer them in the very next episode. J.J. Abrams would have a heart attack if he ever had to write an answer to a mystery that quickly. Oh, and before I forget, it's a nice touch to have Catherine and Carter interact so warmly, since it's been stated that they had worked together extensively to create the dialing program. Just a nice detail. Teal'c also raises the opportunity of finding technology that might be useful against the Goa'uld, since there's also that pressure being applied on the SGC. Hammond quickly approves the mission, showing that the initial anger was simply to keep up appearances and is basically a plausible deniability defense in case they get audited by the government or the military or something, you know? SG-1 plus Catherine find themselves in a dilapidated room when they travel through the gate. We hear waves pounding in the background, and in the outdoor establishing shots throughout the episode, we see that the gate is housed in a fortress of sorts on top of a crumbling cliff face. And it looks like time is not on their side, as the fortress might collapse at any point due to the erosion of the cliff. The group then meet a scraggly, skinny old man, and it's Ernest. Though he is understandably kooky and weird, poking Daniel before enthusiastically hugging the men, though his reaction to seeing Catherine is oddly abrupt and cold. Thankfully, when Daniel chases after him, Ernest has found enough sense to put on some clothing, and Daniel quickly finds out that Ernest has been completely alone for over 50 years. At this moment of recording the episode footage, I was reminded that I had entered a friend's Discord voice chat server, but say hello to Drawza, everyone.
Having a little trouble dealing with it too. I felt like a schoolgirl. My heart was beating faster when I came through the gate.
Daniel asks Ernest if he's seen Egyptian hieroglyphs anywhere in the fortress, and Ernest shows him his notes.
4 distinct languages, writing is unlike anything on Earth. Catherine says they're probably alien.
She found me long ago.
Catherine seems concerned, but I am not. It seems impossible, but every day we're here together, I love her more.
My father lied to me. We had a wonderful life together. In my mind, we didn't have a wonderful life. I thought you were dead. Forgave me. You forgave me long ago.
The sad detail that Ernest hallucinated Catherine being there with him is really heartbreaking, and kind of explains why he reacted the way he did when he saw the real Catherine. The guy who played old Ernest, Keen Curtis's acting when Catherine mentions their differing pasts is just painful to watch in a good way. Time is running out for SG-1 plus Ernest and Catherine when O'Neill informs them that the fortress they're in is on the edge of a cliff and a big storm is heading their way. Ernest casually tells them the big storm happens once every year, which does remind me of a similar thing that happens in Atlantis, but I won't get into it till we get to it. The team realizes that due to the damage from the annual storms, the DHD is damaged, and I like how they do mention that the MALP is also used to make sure that teams don't accidentally strand themselves on a planet, though this one never got to the right angle to see the damage. Since they have time to spare while Carter and Teal'c see what they can do to get home, Ernest decides to show Daniel something. Catherine and O'Neill follow them to a hall with what the wiki describes as a light display device in the middle. 4 different writings light up on pillars that surround the device when it's activated. And I'll let Daniel read Ernest's notes, because this is the introduction to one of the main tenets of the series mythology going forward.
I believe this room is some sort of meeting place where 4 alien races, denoted by the symbols and distinctive writing on the walls, would gather, possibly to share knowledge or discuss relations like a United Nations of the Stars.
When O'Neill touches the big red button that he notes looks familiar. I mean, the DHD has a big red button in the middle if you hadn't noticed it yet. The light display device activates, and they quickly realize that the light display is of atoms and basic elements. I like how in the scene, characters mention that the light display shows 146 elements, when Catherine mentions that present day, the 1990s, science has only discovered 111 elements, and Ernest mentions that the last he knew, there were only 90. It's a really nice detail that shows that these 4 races are more advanced than humanity, without telling the viewers outright. Fun fact, as of 2024, there are currently 118 elements, so we're still quite a bit away from the magical 146 number yet. Daniel realizes that elements is a true universal language.
Of course! How do you ensure universal communication? You reduce the method of communication to the most basic elements common to everyone and everything that exists in the universe, Jack. This is a true universal language.
Daniel recognizes how important the knowledge that the light display device may have, a culmination of all the knowledge of the 4 alien races that used to meet there. But O'Neill reminds them that the knowledge is useless unless they find a way to survive and share the knowledge. Back at the gate room, Carter and Teal'c manage to jerry-rig the DHD and activate the gate, albeit temporarily. But before they could celebrate properly, a section of the fortress crumbles and the section of flooring that the DHD was resting on disappears into the stormy waters way down below. Back in the light display hall, with the Nordic connection from the Othala rune in one of the pillars of writing, Daniel reveals that Thor's race, the Asgards, were one of the 4 alien races that used to meet up in the fortress. And I'll just say this now, the Nox is also one of the 4 races in the fortress, since they have about the same level of technological prowess as the Asgards. As Daniel starts to become more and more engrossed by the meeting room and the light displays, the rest of SG-1 work out they need a power source that might be able to power up the gate and allow them to manually dial home by spinning the inner wheel a la Earthgate. It's interesting that in 2 episodes back to back, they force Daniel to have to sacrifice something that he cares about. In Thor's hammer, it was the titular device itself that had to be destroyed to free Teal'c, and it was destroyed with Teal'c's staff weapon. And in this episode, it's the knowledge left by the 4 races that might be the answer to life, the universe, and everything in it. The device takes the staff shot like a total champ though, and this hilarious O'Neill lines happens when he gets an idea.
I'm obviously no scientist, but couldn't we use that Ben Franklin thing?
I've already had a tangent earlier of how I love the episode titles in this series, and this time we get Ernest to explain it.
Daniel won't come up. He's obsessed with that thing.
The Torment of Tantalus.
What?
Tantalus was a king in Greek mythology, banished to Hades, forced to stand in water that receded when he tried to drink.
Everlasting, unending temptation.
He was reaching for something that was out of reach.
See, at the start I used the word tantalizing because Tantalus is actually the origin of the word tantalizing, because the tale is all about temptation and the storm is getting closer and closer, and luckily the lightning from the storm is enough to power up the gate so that they can manually spin the inner ring and dial back to Earth. Ernest tries to reason with Daniel, and when O'Neill goes to grab Daniel, for a moment Daniel wanted to stay, but then changes his mind, realizing that Ernest was right, and that there was no point in discovering the secrets of the universe if he couldn't share that knowledge with anybody. Due to the unstable powering of the gate, the wormhole begins to destabilize as everyone holds their breath for Daniel and O'Neill to make it back to Earth. But fortunately, everyone is able to make it back safely enough. Sometime later, they attempt to redial the address. However, the gate does not engage, as it seems that the storm has finally succeeded in destroying the fortress the gate was in. At the very least, they managed to save Ernest's book with all the notes he was able to make of the light displays. And I swear, O'Neill gets like all of the best one-liners in the first few seasons.
Catherine, hug me.
Oh, Jack.
And the episode ends on a lighter note as Catherine finally returns Ernest's hug, heavily implying that though it would still be a lot of work, she's willing to start the process of forgiving him and work on a life together. And according to the wiki, Catherine and Ernest end up being together for the rest of their lives. But she's not done with the series yet, but we'll get to it when we get to it. Overall, this is another banger episode by Robert C. Cooper. It's also another episode where there were no bad guys, which is just absolutely insane to me, since the show came out in the monster/case/mystery of the week era of television. Torment of Tantalus manages to bring so much mythology into the series in such a tight script. Just absolutely magnificent writing. I've always loved the episode, even before the rewatch for the video, so it's a strong 9 out of 10 for me. Alright. I've been doing PNGs for these videos because I'm not a stellar talker. I stutter a little, am repetitive, and I do a lot of ums and ahs even while reading off a script. It just means it's easier to edit my commentary without having the footage jump cutting all over the place, but I thought since it's the end of the video, let's try something different. I'm doing this outro pretty much after all of the editing of the video is completed already. Originally, I wanted to do one video for the season, but from my Stargate video, it's obvious that I like to talk about things that I like, and there was quite a lot to talk about when it came to the movie. And because of what the show is to me and what it is to my family, I also felt like there would be a lot to talk about when it came to the season 1 video. I just didn't know exactly how much I apparently had to talk about. Every season 1 of a show is quite dense, like I've said, when it came to carving out its own identity in world building and showcasing the universe the show is set in, but I was pleasantly surprised to see how jam-packed SG-1 Season 1 is in that aspect. Many of the concepts that has been showcased in the episodes I've recapped so far are mainstays in the rest of the franchise, with little retconning ever being done to them, compared to how much work had to be reset from the feature film. At the time of writing, including little editing notes I've included to make sure I don't forget about it when I do edit this huge project, this script is nearing 30,000 words. It's a freaking novella. My brother teased me asking if I was writing a thesis, and all I could say to him was, no, I just really like the show. And I really do like the show, and I really like the world building. And though I struggled through so many slumps while making this video, as there were many bad mental health days, and my family had to move house in the middle of making this video. In fact, as you can see behind me, there's still a lot of stuff that I have to go through to decide what to throw out and what to keep. I still enjoyed making this video immensely. I got into this project after finishing the Stargate movie video, not realizing how much more work went into doing a series recap / semi-analysis on world building, and the amount of time it took to get this video out is a testament of that mistake of mine. I do want to continue with Stargate SG-1 season videos. I've already recorded show footage for the second part of season 1, but it will take a lot of time and work to do, and I want to do smaller projects while I'm slogging through this one. So if anybody has any ideas of smaller or shorter media that they want me to take a look at, I'm all ears. Focusing on other media that takes less work than these Stargate videos means that I can bring out videos on a more audience-friendly schedule, which would help with my future plans on making a Patreon. So I'm also all ears on ideas on Patreon reward ideas. At the end of the day, all that is for future Joel to worry about. For now, I really hope you enjoyed watching my maybe not slightly in-depth recap of the first 11 episodes of Stargate SG-1 Season 1. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.